Kenichi is a pathetic, sweaty loser who has the IQ of a goldfish and gets endlessly bullied every day in school. He tried karate to fend off his bullies, but he was so weak that he got his ass whooped even more. With no friends at school, he's always nose-deep in self-help books, claiming to be a bibliophile. However, his life takes a dramatic turn when he befriends the new girl at school and joins the dojo run by her grandfather to unlock his super strong hidden abilities. Our story starts with Kenichi as he rushes to school late for class and accidentally collides with a girl, who mistakes him for an attacker and throws him on the ground. She quickly apologizes and helps him gather his scattered books. Kenichi shouts at her for attacking him, but she explains her reflexes kicked in when he bumped her. Running together to school, she confidently jumps over a river and encourages him to do the same, but he ends up falling in, and she has to rescue him. Upon arriving to school, he is made to stand outside for being late, while the girl is called in and introduced to the class as Furenji Miu. When he hears that she came from a prestigious school to this place, he questions her intelligence. To prove his point, she introduces herself to the class and informs the teacher that she will join Kenichi outside as a punishment for also being late. Outside the class, she thanks him for his help, even though she had saved him, and asks if he would like to be her friend. He couldn't believe his luck. It seemed like the tips from his books on making friends were finally paying off. After class, Kenichi rushes to the karate club as usual, but a weird-looking boy called Nijima stops him and starts bullying him. He calls him a coward and asks about Furenji, but when he doesn't get the answer he was expecting, he resorts to physically attacking Kenichi. At the karate club, he gets beaten up badly, and everyone makes fun of him, calling him a loser. When the club ends, he's made to do all the cleaning. After finishing his chore, he starts practicing on a punching bag, but a bulky guy called Daimonji stops him and punches him in the gut, saying that he doesn't deserve to be in this club since he's weak. Daimonji threatens him to quit the club, but Kenichi asks if he can continue if he becomes strong enough. In response, Daimonji mocks him, challenging him to a match after a week, where the loser has to quit the club. Later, on his way home, he reads a book about becoming strong and daydreams about becoming a hero, fighting against villains. Suddenly, he sees some thugs troubling Furenji and an old man. Instead of being the hero, Kenichi runs away like a chicken. He scolds himself for running away when she, who is supposed to be his friend, is in trouble. Overcome with guilt, he returns to the scene to try and stop the bad guys. Blindly throwing punches, he hopes one will land on them, but when it does, it has no impact. Angered by this, they grab him and bring out a knife. Before they can do anything, Furenji swiftly intervenes and defeats the attackers with ease. The thugs retreat and she thanks Kenichi again for no reason, calling him brave. She expresses her pleasure having him as her first friend, and he tells her about his experiences at the karate club. Hearing this, she explains that karate was founded for the weak to stand up against bullies, not the other way around. She advises him to seek a place to train in martial arts and become stronger. Taking her advice, Kenichi arrives at the place with the help of a map she drew for him. He tries to push open the door, but nothing happens. Suddenly, a large old man appears and effortlessly opens the door with a push of his finger, startling Kenichi. Panicking, he rushes to leave. The old guy stops him. Kenichi asks if the old guy is the master of martial arts, but the old man, thinking he is being humble, denies it, saying he has never lost a fight in his life. Amazed, Kenichi tells him that Furenji sent him here, and upon hearing this, the old guy takes him inside. They encounter a man named Apachai who is vigorously practicing his punching skills, and upon noticing Kenichi, he gets excited and shows off his skills by punching walls and whatnot. They continue with the tour when he comes across a girl in a room. He finds her cute, but he's shocked when she cleanly cuts off all the blades with a single swipe of her sword. She attacks someone for trying to take pictures of her, and one of her ninja stars almost hits Kenichi, but the old guy stops it and warns him not to go poking around. He is then introduced to someone named Sakaki for his training, but Sakaki doesn't seem interested in taking him as a disciple. He shows off his deadly moves and warns him that if Kenichi trains with him, he'll be dead in 3 days. Not wanting to die so soon, Kenichi prepares to leave, thinking the dojo is weird. However, when he sees another formidable man, he passes out and faints. To his surprise, Furenji wakes him up and asks if he's alright. He tells her to leave with him, considering the place dangerous, but she refuses and shocks him by revealing that this place is her home, and the old guy is none other than her grandfather. He introduces Kenichi to a group of skilled martial artists and explains about this place known as Ryozenpaku. Among them are Shio Sakaki, the karate fighter, Apachai, a master of secret Muay Thai boxing, Kensai Ma, proficient in various Chinese martial arts, Ekuseng Kotsuji, a warrior philosopher, and Shiger Kosaka, skilled in swordplay and weapon handling. The grandfather then introduces himself as the head of the house, and all this information is making Kenichi very uneasy. Instead of rescuing him this time, Furenji excuses herself and steps away to make tea, leaving him all alone with these fighters. They assess him, wondering why she brought him here, likening it to a girl wanting to rescue a butterfly, and they speculate on whether Kenichi will back out from the challenge. The elder addresses him directly, asking if he's ready to join them at Ryozen-paku. He hesitates initially, then nods affirmatively, as joining them might help him become stronger. The Chinese martial arts guy, Kensei, hands him a form to fill out with his personal details and asks him to pay $200 monthly. Upon seeing him upset at the amount, Kensei brings it down to $100 and eventually to $50. It seems all they want is money, and they don't care how much as long as they get it. Just then, Furinji comes back with tea for everyone and starts serving all the masters. The elder justifies the fees and tells Kenichi that they are facing financial hardship, and it's only due to Furinji's exceptional bookkeeping skills that they've managed to stay afloat during this crisis. After hearing about her other responsibilities in this household, he imagines them treating her like a servant and resolves to come here daily, at least to protect her. The elder appoints Akisame as Kenichi's master, since he has some teaching experience and known for his relatively tempered approach, was deemed the least likely among them to jeopardize Kenichi's life during the training process. Kenichi is already getting scared for his life and starts regretting his decision. Without wasting any time, Akisame asks him about his martial arts experience, and he admits his lack of any experience and tells him about being bullied at school. Akisame assures him that Jujutsu can empower him for self-defense and promises not to be an overly strict instructor. But he gets the shock of his life when the training begins, an endurance test in which he has to carry large jars while maintaining his balance. If he falters even slightly, needles will poke him and he will get burned from beneath. He wonders if this is the easy level and the harder ones must be life-threatening. Imagining training with the other masters alone fills him with fear for his life. He lets out a pained scream when he falters and needles pierce his skin. Akisame allows him a moment of a break before giving him another task as part of his training. Kenichi has to carry Akisame while running a distance of 3 train stops to a park. His protests are met only with stern encouragement from Akisame in the form of beatings and scoldings. After this, he is instructed to take a rest, but he is left so exhausted that he can barely walk and considers quitting. However, he changes his mind after seeing Furinji and decides to come back. The following day marks the true beginning of his training. He has to walk between posts while carrying huge jars of water. He asks Akisame when he will truly learn Jujutsu instead of doing all this muscle training, but Akisame tells him that he has to improve his strength first. He explains that no matter the technique, an ant can't defeat an elephant with its strength, but takes back the comparison to an ant and says ants are stronger than him. Unable to tolerate this humiliation, Kenichi wants to quit, but Akisame reminds him of the strength ants possess, inspiring him to persevere. Stating that Akisame has a disciple, the boxer Apakai volunteers to train him as well, and Kenichi is pushed to his limits. The elder finds this amusing and tells him to be grateful for being trained by many masters. Meanwhile, Furinji hears about Daimoji's plan to take Kenichi's life if he participates in their challenge. Wanting to help, she meets him at park later to teach him some techniques. She demonstrates the techniques by intertwining her toes, a move called kuho, and then pivoting outside known as haiho. However, he doesn't understand a thing. So she encourages him to attack her, guiding him through the technique involving footwork and movement. Although he initially refuses to attack her due to his male pride, he quickly learns that gender has nothing to do with learning and follows her instructions. Initially struggling with the movement, he gains insight and improves as she motivates him, emphasizing that progress demands determination and effort. The next day, Furinji waits for him to go to school and wonders why he is late. Soon she sees Kenichi walking towards her while practicing the stepping techniques she taught him yesterday. He tells her that although he started early because he is walking this way, he came late and asks her to go ahead without him. But she refuses, asserting her role as a supportive friend and walks with him to class patiently. His progress is put to the test when he enters the karate club to face Daimonji's challenge to a match. The duel commences and he finds himself struggling against Daimonji's attacks. Drawing on Furinji's teachings, he manages to evade Daimonji's assault. He continues dodging attacks, and his determination shines through as he employs the new technique, causing Daimonji to stumble and fall. Kenichi is declared the winner despite Daimonji's protests, claiming he used a restricted throwing move. Daimonji is asked to leave the club as per his earlier conditions, but Kenichi steps in and admits to using restricted moves to gain an advantage and accepts defeat instead. He leaves the karate club disappointed yet proud of his efforts. Nijima meets him outside and praises him for putting up a good fight. He proceeds to leave, but Kenichi stops him and thanks him. Nijima then reveals a key piece of information. The referee in today's match called Tsukuba is eager to fight him to test his skills. Kenichi starts to panic as Tsukaba is the top fighter in the karate club and contemplates his fate. Nijima mocks him, saying he will be finished in no time, and leaves laughing psychotically. Two boys think Furinji is cute the next day at school and try to get close to her. They are taken aback though when she ignores them and approaches Kenichi, who appears to be depressed over yesterday's events. She informs him, unaware of his attitude, that she has joined the gymnastic club and inquires as to which club he has joined, given that he is no longer a karate student. He tells her, very embarrassingly, that he joined the gardening club and then goes off to water plants, wallow in self-pity. But she stops him, realizing at last how he feels, and she's not sure what to do with him. Just then, Nijima interrupts and introduces himself to her as Kenichi's best friend. Believing it to be true, she introduces herself, much to the jealousy of her classmates. He heads off, saying he will meet her later in gym class, while poor Kenichi seems to be forgotten. During the class, Tsukuba makes noise by crushing a walnut, so the teacher asks him to be quiet. Upon seeing him crush the walnut with ease, the teacher becomes scared and ignores his behavior. He continues crushing walnuts and questions whether Kenichi's display of strength was intentional or a lucky fluke. Later, Nijima informs Furinji that Tsukuba is planning to fight Kenichi, emphasizing that Tsukuba can break stones bare-handed. Meanwhile, Kenichi sits shivering and visibly panicked at the thought of facing him. She deduces that Tsukuba must be a black belt for such strength. At Ryozanpaku, Kenichi waters plants plagued by thoughts of the impending fight that fill him with fear. Recognizing his anxiety, Akisame begins his training to address it. He's made to run like a horse while carrying Akisame, and Kensai provides lessons on leg-strengthening exercises, emphasizing the importance of strong legs in martial arts. Apakai attempts to demonstrate his warm-up routine to Kenichi, but Kenichi flees from the scene. Sakaki confronts Furinji about the technique she taught him and tells her that although she taught him to help him win against the bully, this will only attract stronger opponents who now want to test Kenichi. She is shocked that Sakaki could predict what is happening and realizes that the reason why the masters haven't taught him any techniques is because of this very reason. Sakaki informs her that Kenichi lacks basic core strength, and because of her, he is going to have trouble with other students. To prove his point, Kenichi is sent flying by an excited Apachai and ends up severely injured. He is woken up by his sister at home and he starts rambling, thinking that he passed away and is in heaven. She corrects him and expresses her concern about his well-being. At dinner, his father questions him about his frequent injuries and asks if he really joined a legitimate dojo. He admits it is not legitimate and dismisses the idea of legitimacy. He runs away to his room and his sister follows him, exclaiming that he is being bullied in the dojo as well. Determined to protect his son, his father takes a gun, but Kenichi's mother reassures him that Kenichi's willingness to stand up without backing down is a sign of his determination, and that he should have faith in his son for choosing this dojo. The next day, Kenichi and Furinji scale the school fence in an attempt to evade Tsukuba, and she observes that he is getting tougher every day. In the gymnastics class, a girl named Takashima receives praise for her performance, but when Furinji demonstrates her flexibility during stretch-ups, everyone praises her instead. Seeing this, Takashima becomes jealous and challenges her to perform. She takes a deep breath and showcases her exceptional gymnastic abilities. Everyone praises her, while Takashima wallows in jealousy. They hail her as a master and express their desire to be taught by her. Meanwhile, Kenichi is sneaking around the locker room in an attempt to evade Tsukuba's sight, but as luck would have it, Tsukuba comes upon him from behind and startles him. Tsukuba takes him outside and asks him to fight, but he pleads to be let go. Tsukuba mocks him, calling him a coward, which provokes him to accept the challenge. Kenichi is overpowered and beaten up badly by Tsukuba. Despite the defeat, he refuses to give up and holds Tsukuba's leg tightly. Tsukuba kicks him to let go, and he eventually withdraws after getting exhausted, and Tsukuba notices that he got a bruise from Kenichi's strong grip on him. Furinji returns home to find Kenichi there and inquires about his injuries, but he tells her that he fell from the stairs and leaves. Sakaki informs her that many men hesitate to express their suffering to women and advises her to let him be. Akisame tends to Kenichi's wounds and he laments losing despite his hard work. Akisame inquires about his intentions and he expresses his desire to confront Tsukuba and make him acknowledge his strength and courage. Akisame reassures him and informs him that his technique training will commence the next day. Kenichi's desires make him reflect on the words he once spoke to his own master, emphasizing the importance of his belief in justice. After learning that Kenichi can train in techniques tomorrow, Apache declares his readiness to help him, but Akisame cautions him about understanding his limits. But Apache ignores this and remains enthusiastic about taking Kenichi as his first disciple. The following day, Akisame brings a creepy-looking Buddha statue and informs Kenichi that he is going to teach a technique called the throwing deity grate. Kenichi is asked to throw the statue, but he finds it too difficult to lift. Akisame instructs him to focus on the center of gravity and explains that if he can break his opponent's balance, then he can easily overthrow them. Next, he receives instruction from Kensei, who demonstrates a counterattack technique with the help of Furinji. He practices this technique, but when Apachai comes to teach him, he flees. However, Shiger catches him and hands him over to Apachai like a piece of meat. Reluctantly, he accepts his fate and puts on the boxing gloves, scared for his life. At the start, the training goes smoothly with him punching Apachai, but when Apachai asks him to dodge his punch, Kenichi collapses from the impact. His training intensifies as he practices the throwing deity great technique and the counterattack technique. Every time he throws the statue to the ground, the next time proves to be more difficult instead of easier. All this time, Sakaki watches over his training from afar and starts to take a liking towards him. He praises Kenichi for lasting more than 3 days there and tells him to observe the statue. Kenichi suddenly realizes that this statue is slightly bigger than the previous one, and soon he finds a room full of Buddha statues with varying sizes that Ekisame has been switching deceptively. Taking pity on him, Sakaki offers to make an exception that day and teach him a technique. He questions Kenichi about his opponent's karate style, but he tells him that he doesn't know. Sakaki first gets angry at his reply, but soon becomes gentle with him and asks him to demonstrate Shukaba's fighting stance, which he does. Sakaki tells him that Shukaba has a sports karate style and offers to show a technique that will defeat Shukaba for sure. Shiger and Ekisame are surprised that Sakaki is teaching someone. Later at school, Furinji finds Sukaba beating up a guy and intervenes. When Sukaba touches her, she hits him. Seeing her skills, he asks her to fight him, but Kenichi suddenly appears with his manly pride and stops her from fighting and instead challenges Shukaba on her behalf. She warns Kenichi that he isn't strong enough to fight Sukaba, but he refuses to let go of his pride. The fight begins and Kenichi recollects the technique that Sakaki taught him. He goes to attack Sukaba's face but ends up punching him in the gut with his other hand. This technique is called the Yamazuki of Basai, which works perfectly against sports karate-style players like Shukabaka. Kenichi recalls Sakaki's words about people generally having a fear of being hit in the face and advises him to use this to his advantage by targeting other areas when they cover their face. Sukaba becomes angry and charges forward, but Kenichi uses the special counterattack technique that Kensei had taught him and finally employs the throwing Buddha technique to throw Shukaba to the ground. Compared to the statues, Shukaba is much lighter and gets easily overthrown by Kenichi, resulting in his defeat. Kenichi rushes to him and checks if he is alive, letting out a sigh of relief upon finding him breathing. Furinji finds this cute and giggles playfully at him for caring about his opponent's well-being instead of his own. Back at the dojo, he proudly announces that he won against Sukaba, but Sakaki tells him that he is yet to face the difficult part and that he will find out about it soon. The next day at school, Kenichi gets suspicious when everyone around him seems to be afraid of him, and he shares this with Furinji. It turns out Nijima was publicizing his success against Sukaba to everyone, and Kenichi scolds him for it. However, she supports Nijima and reveals that it was she who told him about Kenichi in exchange for 2 bowls of noodles. Just then, they see some thugs searching for him, and he quickly hides behind Nijima like a chicken. It turns out the thugs are part of a gang called Ragnarok and are searching for Kenichi to challenge him after hearing about his success against Sukaba. After the thugs leave, Nijima scares him by suggesting that they probably know where he lives and won't stop until they find him. Kenichi starts panicking and becomes scared for his life once again. At the dojo, Kenichi is overwhelmed with fear about the impending fight and confides in the masters. However, they remain nonchalant and remark that he should have anticipated that something like this would happen. It's then that he realizes that they already knew that his fight with Shukaba would attract attention. Sakaki tells him not to be a chicken and to see it through, encouraging him to become the strongest in the school. At school, the thugs are actively searching for him, but he manages to escape and takes refuge in the gardening club. There he meets a girl called Izumi, who questions Kenichi's motives for joining the gardening club. He explains his interest in flowers and his enjoyment of watering plants. She brings up the rumors surrounding him, but he declines, saying that he isn't that strong. Suddenly, Nijima enters the scene and Kenichi, agitated by the rumors he has spread, scolds him and throws him out of the club. Nijima complains about being unappreciated and leaves before mentioning that he came to inform Kenichi about those thugs who are looking for him. Back at the dojo, Kenichi's training with Apachai leaves him exhausted. The other masters ask Apachai to finish training him quicker so that they can take their turn with him. Seeing that the masters are fighting over him, he asks if he has some hidden talent in martial arts. However, they burst his bubble and tell him that he has no talent. Unable to bear the shame, Kenichi contemplates ending his life, but Furinji intervenes and tries to stop him. Sakaki assures him that practice will never betray him and breaks a bottle to demonstrate how he can do the same to his opponent's chin or jaw. Sakaki's words motivate him and he practices by punching a wooden pole. The masters devise a plan concerning Kenichi and Furinji and asks him to go on a date with her that Sunday. They give him movie tickets and instruct him to complete his workouts and training beforehand. He happily agrees and continues to practice enthusiastically. Several days pass, and the plan seems to be working great as Kenichi goes through all his training with the prospect of going out with her fueling his determination. On the day of their date, they take the metro to the movie theater, and Furinji reveals that this will be her first time watching a movie in a theater. Suddenly, they spot Nijima, who greets them, but Kenichi drags her and gets off the train, wanting to go to the theater alone with her. Anticipating that Nijima might be waiting for them at the next station, he suggests that they walk to the theater. They finally arrive at the theater, and to his horror, Nijima is already there waiting for him. So he suggests that they go to a restaurant instead. She hesitates, not wanting to waste the tickets, so he starts acting like he is hungry and proceeds to eat the ticket to prove his point. They go to a restaurant to eat, and there she reveals that it's her first time eating fast food too. He thinks back to all the work and responsibility she has in her home and decides to make this day memorable for her. After eating, they explore the streets, play fun games, and interact with a cat. Later, they go to an amusement park, and she reveals that it's her first time there as she is always training and never gets to do normal teenage stuff. She expresses her wish to ride the merry-go-round, and they get on it. She sees a little girl and waves at her, and upon seeing her happy, he becomes happy as well. They finally head to the theater as per her request, although Kenichi isn't keen on going as he thinks Nijima might still be there. But when they arrive at the theater, they hear alarming sounds nearby and go to investigate. There, they witness Nijima being attacked by a group of thugs. Kenichi suggests that they leave and go to the theater, but Furinji insists that they help Nijima. He thinks back to the time when he made a promise to help the weak if he can and goes to face the thugs to rescue Nijima. Drawing strength from Sakaki's words about practice, he confronts the thugs and kicks one, who then collapses on the ground. Nijima takes this opportunity to exaggerate his martial arts prowess to intimidate them. Furinji questions him about how the thugs knew they were there, and Nijima reveals that a Chinese guy with a hat, who happens to be Kensei, was handing out Kenichi's activity schedule to the thugs. Later, Kenichi confronts Kensei about this, who tells him that this was actually Akasame's idea. He complains that because of them, he now has a target on his back. Akasame describes his idea as a carrot-and-stick strategy and reveals their intent to use Furinji as his motivational backbone. Kenichi voices his concerns about involving her, but the masters explain that this approach is known as tough love. Sakaki elaborates that Kenichi must eventually face the gang, so he should be prepared to encounter them at all times. Furinji suggests that they seek advice from her grandfather regarding this matter. The elder shares his own experiences of being bullied and the eventual repercussions for his tormentors, encouraging him to brace for future challenges as more adversaries will come his way. The next day, Kenichi secretly admires Furinji's impressive gymnastic skills during her session. As the session goes on, Takashima hurls a stick at her in an attempt to make her trip, but she catches it gracefully with her ribbon, earning praise from everyone present. Kenichi informs his family about spending weekends at the dojo. Concerns arise, with his dad fearing he might get brainwashed and tell him to embrace his inner American and carry a gun. Kenichi's sister worries about potential nightly beating that his pathetic brother might receive every night and tells him to drop this plan of his, but he refuses and goes to the dojo, only to return completely bruised and battered while his poor sister goes to him with a box of medicine. At the dojo, Kenichi, determined to intensify his training, dons his karate outfit and observes the masters in their training with admiration. However, when he approaches Shigeru and asks about her plan, she leaves without responding. Akase informs him that for the next 2 days he has to engage in rigorous training and introduces a device he developed called the Great Leg Sprinter. This device is designed to enhance a person's flexibility, a crucial aspect of martial arts. Akase asks Furinji to assist him. As she pushes the device, it widens Kenichi's legs, causing him to shout in pain, expressing his inability to endure it any longer. Akase explains that the device is meant to gradually achieve a 180-degree leg split after 16 hours, and that if he wishes to stop, he should use a safe word. Furinji continues to push the device and Kenichi's screams continue, but he starts to relax a bit as she assists him in achieving the split. Suddenly, Kenichi's sister barges in, having observed his struggles in secret. Her entrance causes Furinji to fall onto Kenichi, accidentally making him perform the 180-degree split before he could use his safe word. His sister tries to embrace him, but he pushes her away, unable to bear the pain. Akase intervenes and checks on Kenichi's condition. He kicks Kenichi's leg, miraculously relieving the pain. Akase reveals his background in acupuncture and assures Kenichi that he can break as many bones as he wants, since he's there to mend them. When Kenichi introduces his sister to Furinji, she comments on how cute she is, but his sister accuses Furinji of toying with her brother's emotions. She urges Kenichi to come home with her and attempts to drag him by his hands, but he breaks free and stays back at the dojo. His sister becomes upset and hands over the gift her mother gave to Furinji before leaving. Furinji mentions that Kenichi is fortunate to have a sister, so he inquires about her family. She sadly tells him that her parents are gone and that her grandfather is all she has left before leaving. The masters tease him, suggesting that he hurt her emotionally. He reflects on her talent and speculates that her tragic past might have compelled her into martial arts during her childhood. Overwhelmed with emotions, he decides to apologize to her, but he is intercepted by Akisame, who hands him over at Apachai for further training. Shiga returns and inquires about Kenichi, who is battered and bruised from his training session with Apachai. The elder asks if she's concerned, but she replies that she isn't and leaves. He reflects on Kenichi's positive impact on everyone since his arrival. At dinner, Kenichi is surprised to see that Furinji has prepared a variety of dishes. He asks why Shiger hasn't joined them for dinner, and Furinji explains that Shiger prefers to eat alone. As he's about to eat, the masters steal his food, leaving him with nothing to eat. Later in the night, feeling hungry, he receives a meal served by Furinji on the rooftop exclusively for him. This gives him the opportunity to apologize to her, and she accepts his apology, mentioning that she isn't sad anymore. Curious about each other's aspirations, she asks him about his dreams, and he reveals his desire to become a novelist. In return, he asks her about her own dreams, to which she claims they are a secret. However, Shiger reveals Furinji's aspiration to become a beautiful bride by reading a letter she had written a couple of years back. Embarrassed, Furinji tries to snatch the letter from Shiger, who leaves the scene. She then expresses her wish for him to be her best friend forever. While he is saddened by the fact that he can't be her boyfriend, he acknowledges that their current friendship is for the best. A few days later, at the gardening club, Kenichi is engrossed in watering the plants. Izumi notices his lively demeanor and comments on it. He explains that the club is his only safe haven from the thug group and martial art masters. He recalls the intense training he endured in the dojo, but remains resolute about not quitting the club because of Furinji. She playfully remarks that despite the rumors of him being the strongest and meanest boy in school, he is quite good-natured. He dispels these rumors, attributing them to Nijima. Curious, she asks about his favorite plant, which he affectionately calls the Snowman King, and he expresses his concern about its slow growth. Meanwhile, Nijima is spying on them from outside and thinks to himself that there is no way Kenichi is going to survive against the thugs, as he had witnessed their brutal attacks earlier. At the dojo, Kenichi practices his punching, but Sakaki corrects his posture and demonstrates how to properly punch by breaking a wall with his bare hands. Kenichi says that he can't be like him as he doesn't have huge muscles. Sakaki tells him not to make excuses and calls for Furinji to demonstrate. He explains that in terms of muscle strength alone, she is weaker than him and asks her to showcase her punches. She displays her prowess by executing 6 strong and precise punches per second, leaving Kenichi shocked. Sakaki explains the nuances of karate styles, Nahat, which emphasizes muscle strength, and Shurite, which focuses on the speed of fists when striking. He tells Kenichi that he should eventually master both styles, but for now, he should start with Shurite and focus on speed. Kensai interrupts them and declares that it's his turn to teach Kenichi. He demonstrates an arm-swinging movement and encourages Kenichi to practice it in the neighborhood while he indulges in reading a somewhat inappropriate book. As Kenichi practices the peculiar swinging arm movement in the streets, onlookers make fun of him, causing him embarrassment. However, despite this, he takes the exercise seriously and persists. Witnessing his determination, Furinji joins him as well. She tells him that this is an exercise to loosen his muscles and explains that when he swings his arm forcefully in one direction, it also engages strength in the opposite direction. They continue conversing while performing the exercise when, unexpectedly, they encounter a thug from the Ragnarok group. The thug introduces himself as Taichi and targets Furinji, declaring his intention to make her his girlfriend by defeating Kenichi. Furious at his audacity, she reacts strongly, but he responds with maniacal laughter. Taichi's friends surround Kenichi and Furinji, effectively trapping them and making escape seemingly impossible. But to their luck, Sakaki appears out of nowhere and intervenes. Thinking that this is the perfect time to train Kenichi, he instructs him about the importance of proper stance before stepping away for him to deal with the thugs. Seeing Sakaki leave, Taichi initiates an attack on Kenichi, causing him to fall. Furious, Furinji breaks free from the thug's grasp and fights them back. Kenichi realizes he made a mistake by moving too slowly and tries to counter Taichi's attack, but it fails. So he employs Kensei's swing arm movement and defeats him, leaving him disoriented. Unable to accept his defeat, Taichi asks the rest to attack him, but Furinji defeats them all and apologizes to him for not saving him a few of the thugs. Scared, Taichi flees the scene, calling her a monster, and Kenichi tries to console her. At the dojo, Sakaki praises him for his victory and asks if his training helped him against the thugs. Kenichi replies that it was indeed helpful, but he privately acknowledges that it was actually Kensei's technique that allowed him to land a lucky hit on Teichi's shin. Sakaki then informs him that Apachai is upset with him for missing his training session that day. He goes to Apachai to apologize and explains the situation. The following day, Sakaki assigns Kenichi to train with Furinji and then leaves. Akisame does the same and asks him to train alongside her. He instructs him to use both offensive and defensive techniques simultaneously and introduces new elements to his training routine. During his practice session with Apachai, Kenichi attempts to evade him by throwing the Buddha statues. Seeing this, Akisame complains about the damaged statues to Kensei, and they discuss Apachai's unconventional training methods. At school, Kenichi worries about his progress in training and seeks solace in the gardening club. But when he arrives at the club, he discovers that Azumi is held captive by Daimonji and witnesses Daimonji's friends damaging plants, including his favorite plant called Snowball King. Daimonji challenges him to a fight, threatening to harm Azumi otherwise. Angered by Daimonji's actions, Kenichi swiftly evades Daimonji's kick and lands a blow to his stomach, causing him to collapse. Seeing Daimonji's friends flee the scene, Kenichi becomes upset that he couldn't save his plants and apologizes to them. However, Azumi reassures him and suggests that they restore the plant by repotting the damaged one. After a few days, much to Kenichi's surprise, Azumi shows him the Snowball King plant and tells him that it has survived. He becomes extremely happy and reflects on the plant's deep roots and gradual growth, realizing that it parallels his own martial arts journey. He recalls his recent success against Daimonji's kicks and becomes content with his progress. He vows to continue working hard so that he can become like his resilient plant, the Snowball King. The goons are actively looking for him at school the next day. To avoid their pursuit, Kenichi hides inside a cupboard and quietly consumes the food that was provided to him. Later, he is confronted by a man named Takashi. Kenichi becomes enraged that this man disrupted his shopping plans with Furinji and prepares to confront him while she looks after the other men. Kenichi admires her abilities and manages to injure Takashi with a punch. As Takashi prepares to assault Kenichi with his knife, she advises him to be careful and intervenes, seizing his belt to neutralize Takashi and his pals. The dojo's instructors observe that Kenichi appears to be depressed after returning from his shopping excursion. Apachai shows concern and asks Sakaki if he can go comfort him. Sakaki tells Apachai to leave Kenichi alone. Going outside, Kenichi muses over his altercation with Takashi, especially the way he became frightened when he saw the knife. Joining him, Shigeru makes an effort to capture his interest. She shows him what she can do when he doesn't answer. Akisame tells him she can handle a variety of weapons and that she would like to teach him how to use them. He doesn't appear to be interested in weapons though, so Akisame stresses how crucial it is to comprehend weapons in order to effectively oppose them. The masters, along with Furinji, attentively watch Kenichi's training session with Shigeru. She informs him that they are going to start with a knife, but Furinji takes the knife from her hands and gives her a spoon instead. Shigeru proceeds to use the spoon to tear his clothing as a demonstration. Hearing the commotion, the elder joins them as well and offers his insight, stating that whether it's a knife or a spoon, they are simply metal objects that are harmless unless they strike you. He explains that it doesn't matter what object Shigeru is using, as she never misses her mark. The elder encourages Kenichi to calmly observe her movements and find an opening to attack. This time, they practice with paper rolls. She instructs him on proper posture through a series of hits with her paper roll, highlighting his vulnerabilities. She corrects his stance and asks him to initiate an attack. However, when he does, she effortlessly counters his moves. Despite repeated attempts, Kenichi continues to fail, eventually collapsing on the ground due to exhaustion. The elder tells him the importance of courage in combat, as it enables him to be calm and help him find his opponent's weaknesses. However, Kenichi doubts himself as he feels he is lacking in courage. The elder advises him that training is the key and tasks Shigeru to push his limits. After his intense training with Shigeru, he becomes exhausted and is unable to walk properly. He then sees Sakaki training and admires his physique, dreaming of possessing similar muscles. Suddenly, Akisame interrupts his thoughts and invites Kenichi to go shopping with him. However, it turns out that Kenichi is once again made to haul him like a horse as part of their routine tire workout, and their exercise continues. On the streets, Kenichi feels embarrassed before girls as they walk by making fun of him. He questions when he will graduate from basic training, but Akisame dispels the notion and tells him that there is no graduating from basic training. He explains that in the past, martial artists prioritized sparring over excessive muscle training. Akisame elaborates on the risks and benefits of building muscle only through sparring. While it enhances specific muscles necessary for fighting, it carries a higher risk of injury. When asked if he's willing to attempt it, Kenichi hesitates and says no. After finishing their shopping, they walk back to the dojo. Along the way, they come across a gang harassing two girls, one of whom is Izumi. Kenichi realizes that these are the same individuals who had bullied and fought with Furinji. The gang leader identifies Kenichi, and they surround him. Akisame asks the girls to run away and intervenes, showcasing his incredible strength by breaking the leader's bone. He subsequently mends it, explaining that he had dislocated the bone by mistake. The gang leader instructs his men to fetch their chief and gather more weapons. Soon, the chief arrives, a massive figure donning a comical mask. A showdown between Akisame and the chief unfolds, during which Akisame demonstrates his incredible combat prowess and imparts valuable techniques to Kenichi. As the situation intensifies, the gang leader draws a gun and aims it at Akisame. Confidently, he approaches the gang leader and pulls him by his head, separating their fight to ensure the safety of passersby. Kenichi is astonished by his sensei's skills and stealthily observes their fight. What he witnesses both terrifies and impresses him about Akisame, leading him to vow to keep the incident a secret and not reveal it to anyone. Following that, Kenichi confides in Sakaki about Akisame's strength and gains knowledge of the three distinct muscle types in the human body. Pink muscle, which possesses a balanced combination of both endurance and speed, red muscle for speed, and white muscle for speed. He learns from Sakaki that Akisame defied training conventions by undergoing strange training for 20 years, which turned all of his muscles pink. After that, Furinji is concerned about Kenichi as he gets ready to leave the house. Her concerns are unfounded, he assures her, but on the way home he runs into Takashi, who is prepared to fight him and has a knife. He remembers the elder saying that as long as they don't hit him, knives and spoons are just metal objects. Using this newfound understanding, he disarms Takashi by mocking him and kicking the knife away when he sees an opportunity. He then remembers Akisame's advice on targeting opponents' vital points to throw them off balance and proceeds to strike Takashi's face. While Takashi is disoriented, Kenichi rambles about his pitiful life and the rigorous training he undergoes at the dojo. Meanwhile, Furinji observes him in secret, finding relief and happiness in Kenichi's newfound resolve. The next day, Shigeru uses the throwing deities to give Apachai specific training on how to restrain himself when fighting, but he totally sucks at it, although he manages to spare one of the deities. Seeing this improvement, he gets into a frenzy, excited that he has finally gained enough control to teach Muay Thai techniques to Kenichi. At school, some thugs from the Ragnarok group show up to Kenichi's class, asking about his whereabouts, so his classmates say that he always goes missing at lunchtime. The gang leader thinks that they're covering for him, so he jacks one of the guys up and threatens him, but the scaredy cat tells him that Kenichi usually hangs out with Furinji and disappears into thin air. Eventually, the gang leader drops the hanging boy and heads straight to the locker, dragging it down with so much confidence because he thinks that Kenichi might be hiding there, but he only finds a creepy-looking doll with an inscription saying that Kenichi will defeat their gang. One of the members, Takeda, laughed hysterically because their leader, Yukita, looked very confident that he'd find Kenichi in the locker, but only found this stupid doll mocking their gang. As all these went on, Kenichi was on the rooftop with Furinji looking for the creepy voodoo doll given to him by Apachai to protect him from the thugs. Just when they thought they had found the perfect hideout, Furinji sees a hand trying to climb onto the rooftop, so she immediately kicks the hand but finds out that it is Nijima and quickly apologizes to him. Kenichi is upset that Nijima is invading his private time with Furinji, but Nijima tells Kenichi that it is only a matter of time before Ragnarok's thugs find his secret hideout, meaning Kenichi has to find a better hideout. Nijima also said that he planned to make some quick cash by misleading the guys about Kenichi's whereabouts. Kenichi is fed up with his crook of a friend, so he decides to leave with Furinji, but Nijima offers him some really helpful information on Yukita and Takeda's fighting and only offers to divulge these secrets if Kenichi begs him and licks his disgusting shoes. When they settle down, Nijima tells Kenichi that Yukita was expelled from school because he had an obsession with winning fights and that he had a signature move called the shoulder throw, which was facilitated by his large body size. Nijima also said Yukita had a higher fighting index than Kenichi, who was better off quitting, given that he didn't stand a chance against Yukita. Matters get worse when Kenichi learns that Takeda was once a rookie in the world of boxing, and after hearing this, he immediately runs for his life. When he arrives at the dojo, he meets the masters playing a game and having so much fun at it, but Sasaki explains that they were simply playing to decide who gets to teach Kenichi new techniques. The winner conveniently turns out to be Apachai. Kenichi freaks out because he will be fighting against a boxer, but Akisame and Apachai reassure him that the Muay Thai techniques will give him sufficient training to defeat a boxer within a short time. While it seems the art of Muay Thai is a deadly one and Apachai gets overly excited to put Kenichi through it, Their first lesson is Tan Guard Mue to achieve a good stance, followed by T-Soak, a move involving your elbows and knees, which are the basic components of Muay Thai. Akase warns Kenichi to be careful, because the wrong elbow and knee movements in Muay Thai could kill his opponents, and this discourages Kenichi from being interested in learning it. However, the elder tells him that his knowledge of Muay Thai could help him protect weaker people from bullies, and that harming his opponent wasn't the ultimate goal, as long as he harbored no negativity in his heart. Meanwhile, a misunderstanding arises amongst the gang members of Ragnarok, because one of the leaders of the gang is fed up with Takeda's slowness in gathering information, until he says that they found Kenichi's secret hideout. So far, Kenichi has been doing well practicing the basic moves of Muay Thai, so Apache tells him that it is time to throw punches, but Kenichi is worried about Apache's inability to control his strength, so he mistakenly hits Furonji while trying to escape him. This saddens Apache, who feels that all of his self-restraint training has been wasted, but Kenichi cheers him up and decides to take the risk. After Kenichi launches his first blows, Apache is next, but as soon as Apache throws in the first punch, he sends our favorite disciple on a 5-second visit to heaven. Later, Sasaki admires Apache as he plays with a bunch of kids and tells them that he's unhappy about a mistake he made. As Sasaki watches the kids try to cheer him up, he smiles. Back up at the dojo, Kenichi is all fired up for the next phase of his training, but Furonji is worried that he has developed some form of amnesia because of the head injuries from his fight with Apache, so she reports this to Akase, but he says the memory loss is only convenient for the time being. Also, Sasaki is happy to see Apache doing some restrainment training with their old man. When Apache's frustration about his deadly punches sets in, his master tells him to handle his fights with Kenichi as though he's just playing with the neighborhood kids and not as some form of martial arts. Kenichi, still in an ecstatic mood, can't wait to continue his training with Apache, but on his way, Shiger offers him a helmet to protect his head from potential injury. However, he ignores her and wonders what's gotten into her. When he gets to the training ground, Apache promises him to be careful this time around, but Kenichi feels this is a déjà vu. As the training begins, Sasaki wonders if the elder's advice to Apache will be of any use, so the elder tells him that Apache is only brutal in real fights because of his reflexes, but since he is soft and gentle at heart, he could easily pull this through. Sasaki confirms this, saying that Apache is the most carefree person he knows. The elder compliments Sasaki's concern about his friend because had specifically asked the elder to train Apache, but Sasaki feels betrayed because this was supposed to be her little secret. While they continue the training, it is now Apache's turn to throw a punch, and he almost throws another deadly one at Kenichi, but he remembers the elder's words and imagines Kenichi as a kid. When he finally throws the punch, it is so soft that Kenichi barely hits the ground. Everyone is surprised and impressed to see that Apache's punch didn't do any actual harm to Kenichi, but when he later kicks him, he sends the poor guy into another world, creating a hole in the wall. The next day, Takeda and Yukita go to Kenichi's hideout, waiting to pounce on him, but as luck will have it, Kenichi doesn't show up that day. This means trouble for the guys because this marks a month of their failure to present Kenichi to their ring leader, hence threatening their position in Ragnarok, so Takeda comes up with a plan he calls Mission Impossible. At practice time, Furonji tells Kenichi to practice with her, but he tells her that it goes against his principle of never hitting a woman. Hearing this, Sasaki seizes the opportunity to roast him, telling him that his punches will have no effect on Furonji, and that she is the perfect partner to practice sparring with, given that the dojo masters are too advanced for him. Furonji takes a moment to personally acknowledge Kenichi's kind nature, but she suddenly begins to attack him and give him some serious ass-kicking, and the elder tells him that kindness isn't defined by allowing his butt to be mercilessly kicked, and that it was rude of him to be uncooperative when Furonji genuinely sought to improve his fighting skills. When he had taken enough beating, he braced himself to fight with Furonji, but he ended up defeated, even though she was taking it easy on him. They later have tea, and Kenichi begins to blush after noticing that they are alone in a room. She notices that he's acting weird and wonders why, so he quickly changes the subject, but within the blink of an eye, Nijima once again shows up to spoil the show for Kenichi, making Kenichi feel fed up and frustrated. Nijima then says that he has some information concerning Takeda. Turns out that he was such an incredible fighter that he won a boxing tournament with his trademark move called the elusive left. The move is a surprising straight punch from his left fist to his opponent's head, causing the opponent to black out and have no recollection of previous events. Hearing this, Kenichi says he's probably going to die soon. In school, those two jerks from Kenichi's class are plotting how to ask Furonji out on a date, so they say they're going to be best friends with him to get closer to her. Unfortunately for them, Yukita walks in on them at that moment and asks them to follow him, thinking they're Kenichi's best friends. During lectures, Kenichi opens his book only to find a note from Yukita threatening to kill his two best friends. Initially, Kenichi is surprised, knowing that he has no friends other than Furanji and maybe Nijima. Just then, the teacher announces that Shimayama and Tayaka are absent, so Kenichi understands what's going on, but he can't be any less bothered because they were more bullies than friends to him and didn't deserve being rescued. On the rooftop, the so-called best friends have been tied up by Yukita, and this was all according to Takita's plan to lure Kenichi to them until one of them confesses that contrary to what he thinks, they aren't Kenichi's best friends but guys that used to bully him. Annoyed that they have wasted his time, Yukita roughs them up, but suddenly, a voice orders him to let them go. Noticing that Kenichi is absent, Furanji becomes worried about him. Yukita is finally happy to lay his hands on Kenichi and tries to use his famous shoulder throw to destroy him, but Kenichi evades all his attacks, much to his astonishment. This upsets Yukita, so he runs furiously towards Kenichi. But when he gets closer, Kenichi employs the cow-lie technique and uses his knees to kick him in the face, sending him to the ground. Unfortunately for Kenichi, this move was really hard on Yukita, and he immediately became unconscious. Seeing this, Takita is charged up and takes out a white chalk and a stopwatch. With the chalk, he draws a square, and when he's done, he smashes it in the air with his bare hands. Takeda tells Kenichi that he was once a professional boxer, so he would give himself a handicap by using only his right hand. After inviting Kenichi into the fighting ring, he turns on the stopwatch and begins to move from side to side in a confusing manner. He confidently tells Kenichi to try knocking him down, but says that being knocked down thrice in one round will mean he loses. The moment Kenichi walks into the ring, he employs the Muay Thai technique on his opponent, but Takeda instantly delivers 3 super fast punches to his face that throws him to the ground. Kenichi can't fathom what just transpired, but he manages to pull himself from the ground and make another attempt at redeeming himself. Kenichi attempts to punch and kick Takeda, but no matter how hard he tries, Takeda evades all his attacks. When Takeda finds an opening, he delivers another set of 3 quick, powerful punches that injure Kenichi, causing him to bleed and fall for the second time in this round as he realizes that he is no match for Takeda. Just when all hope seems lost, Kenichi remembers the Thailand technique, which is essentially a low kick that effectively targets a boxer's weakness. The moment he rises again, he targets Takeda's knees with a low kick and surprises the boxer with another low kick. This convinces Takeda that Kenichi's knowledge goes beyond karate and that he possesses incredible lower body strength. With a final kick, Kenichi weakens Takeda's knees and he falls down but rises immediately. At this point, Takeda is much slower than before, so Kenichi lands a punch on his face, but just when he's about to deliver one of his signature knee kicks, the alarm goes off and they both take a break. Takeda feels terribly weak in his knees but tries not to show it, as he wonders just what kind of a human being Kenichi is, while Kenichi wonders why someone as talented as Takeda had to quit boxing. At the dojo, Apachai has a bad feeling about the day, so he performs a mini ritual on his voodoo doll to ensure Kenichi's safety. Meanwhile, Kenichi and his opponent are still on a short break, so to fulfill his curiosity, Kenichi asks Takeda why he quit boxing. Takeda is taken aback by the question and warns Kenichi against asking people about sensitive matters so that he won't lose friends. Takeda begins to tell his story. It all began in his earlier days as a boxing rookie when he had a best friend named Aikshida, who was a comrade in war and a huge support to him. However, one day something unfortunate happened to Aikshida, and Takeda decided to intervene despite the fact that he had a match the following day. Just when Takeda's story takes an interesting turn, the alarm rings, meaning that they have to return to their match. Kenichi wasn't ready to return to the fight, so he begged Takeda to complete his sad story, but Takeda was already charged up for another round of ass-whooping. They resume the fight, and Kenichi is very insistent on using his low kick technique, but Takeda continues to evade his attacks, eventually using his unbelievable speed to land some punches on Kenichi's face and body. At this time, Kenichi remembers something Apachai told him during his training, which helps him maneuver his way out of Takeda's attacks. In the heat of their fight, Kenichi still probes Takeda to continue his story, and he continues from where he stops. On the day he found out that his friend was in trouble with some bad guys, Takeda immediately rushed to the scene, and together they conquered the bad guys, but Takeda had sustained injuries to his left forearm. So he missed his match the following day and unfortunately, never played a match again because his hand never fully recovered, but Aikshida went on to win lots of tournaments and become a star, leaving him behind. What caused the negative change in Takeda's behavior was that his friend later stopped acknowledging him and shoved him aside, despite the fact that he was the reason why Takeda got injured in the first place. Now, Takeda says that his experience makes him want to teach naive boys like Kenichi that friendship is nothing but a damned illusion, given that the 2 boys he came to rescue had already abandoned him to his fate. At this point, Kenichi is exhausted and almost defeated that he disagrees with Takeda, telling him that he actually did not come for the two boys that left him, but because he didn't have the heart to let them suffer, while he could do something about it. Seizing the opportunity before him, Kenichi swiftly delivers his signature knee kick, throwing Takeda's body through the net. By some miracle, Kenichi was able to rescue Takeda from falling to his death, although he was really surprised at how quickly matters got out of control. Meanwhile, Furinji is in class and wonders why Kenichi is taking so long to return, but a piece of paper draws her attention to Takeda's suspended body being supported by Kenichi. She quickly takes an excuse from the class teacher and runs to Kenichi's aid. Still struggling to pull him up, Kenichi tells Takeda to extend his left arm, but unfortunately, Takeda has been unable to move his arm since the unlucky incident. Takeda tells Kenichi to give up on rescuing him because he's not going to make it, and besides that, Kenichi was subjecting himself to the risk of falling with Takeda. With the last ounce of strength in him, Kenichi pulls Takeda towards the rooftop, while he himself almost doubles over, but from a miraculous intervention of Yukita, who has finally regained his consciousness. Immediately after Yukita pulls him up and reprimands him for almost getting himself killed, Kenichi passes out on the ground and Furinji walks in to meet him in that state. Infuriated, she proceeds to beat the hell out of Yukita and Takeda. Later, Furinji takes them to Emisake, who tends to their wounds, and Takeda compliments her extraordinary strength. When Emisake asks Takeda about his injured arm, he is surprised because he had never spoken to him about it. Emisake then messages the arm, even though it puts Takeda in a lot of pain, and tells him that the reason why he hasn't been able to move his arm all this while is because of a nerve compression issue. As Takeda tries to pull his hand away from pain, he realizes that he has regained movement in the arm. Even better for Takeda, Emisake told him that he could now return to full-time boxing, but Emisake tells him that he would have to endure his painful bone-setting techniques about 700 times. When Kenichi returns home, he effortlessly opens a stubborn jar that his father had struggled with earlier. This simple feat fills his father with pride, acknowledging the strength his son has developed. As he lies in bed, Kenichi consults his numerous self-help books on romance and realizes that he needs to adopt an assertive approach to ask Furinji out on a date. However, approaching her proves challenging, as she exudes a formidable aura. His sister walks in, curious about his reading material, leading to a tussle. Suddenly, their father enters and reads something from the book, making Kenichi profoundly uncomfortable. Kenichi's father, on the other hand, doesn't put much stock in those peculiar self-help books. He encourages his son to find his unique way of winning Furinji's heart. Still, Kenichi expresses a lack of confidence without the book. His father shares a personal story recounting how his wife's passionate love drove her to write him numerous letters in their younger days. Just then, Kenichi's mother brings out the love letters her husband used to send her and teases to read them to the kids, but he holds her tightly to keep his secret safe. When the Ragnarok gang members hear of Takeda's defeat, Suji mocks Kizara for relying on the boxer. She admits her surprise at Kenichi's survival. One of the gang members advises her against letting Kenichi join another gang, fearing potential harm. She decides that the only solution is to eliminate the boy. Upon hearing this, Suji offers to deal with Kenichi personally. Later, Kenichi goes to apologize to the two bullies for getting them involved in his problems with the gang members. They, in turn, are surprised and intimidated, thinking that he is setting a trap for them. They feel they owe him an apology for running away after he had rescued them. Eventually, they conclude that he's just a lonely individual. While practicing the Fumiji, Kenichi mentions that he has something to tell her, but she instructs him to focus and promptly slams his body to the ground during their sparring session. However, after the fight, Kenichi loses his confidence to ask her out. When she departs, he decides to seek dating advice from the dojo masters. This doesn't go well because Sasaki can advise him on anything except women and money. Emisake turns relationship advice into an advanced math class, and Apacha is engrossed in a conversation with rabbits. Kensei tells him to just go for it and ask Furinji out directly, but Kenichi wonders how that is possible when it seems like she could tear off his arm or something like that. Kensei then tells Kenichi that he can't have a good relationship with Furinji if he can't even trust her. When Kenichi says he doesn't know much about Furinji, Kensei immediately pulls out a secret photo album he created with Furinji's pictures. Initially, it looks like Kenichi is pissed with him, but he immediately praises Kensei for a job well done and empties his pockets in return for the photo album. Just when he starts going through the album, Furinji walks in and asks what they've been up to, but they react hysterically, trying to hide the album. However, Furinji sweetly asks if Kenichi can accompany her to go shopping. Contrary to his expectations of a romantic setting, Kenichi has been carrying what seemed like an entire planet to him, and Furinji only added more and more items to the bulk, leading Kenichi to compare himself with Atlas. Furinji then explains that she asked him to accompany her because no one else in the house would be useful, and she wanted them to catch up since they've both been busy lately, but just as friends. Suddenly, they encountered Tsuji and some other members of the Ragnarok gang. Tsuji says he wants to privately discuss something with Kenichi, while Furunji can be on her way. But one of the smaller fries in the gang is upset because the initial deal was for them to kill Kenichi so he could have Furunji to himself. Tsuji gets angry at the annoying guy and spins him multiple times in the air, flinging him into garbage. The gang members eventually leave with Kenichi, and Furunji makes a quick call to Apachai, telling him to come pick up the groceries while she runs after the thugs. On her way, Kensei joins Furunji and immediately takes out his camera and begins taking pictures of her plot developments, ignoring all her protests. To give her a reality check, Kensei tells her that Tsuji is way stronger than Kenichi, but asks her if she will continue fighting all of Kenichi's battles. He then told her that support can become unnecessary and even hurtful for a guy like Kenichi. Understanding that Furunji couldn't help being concerned about Kenichi, Kensei said that they could follow him discreetly and maybe fight discreetly too, if it came to that. As they hold a private conversation, Tsuji asks Kenichi to be one of his subordinates because he wants to have strong guys under his command and eventually work his way to the top of Ragnarok. To him, that is the mark of a powerful man, but Kenichi asks Tsuji whether he plans to remain a delinquent with no real future plans for the rest of his life. This upsets Tsuji because, frankly speaking, Kenichi's words make a lot of sense. Tsuji then says that freedom is essential to a man. However, Kenichi tells Tsuji that freedom didn't warrant them causing harm to others and was otherwise tyranny on those grounds. After saying this, Kenichi turns to leave, but Tsuji challenges him to a fight because Kenichi just insulted their freedom. Kenichi isn't willing to resort to violence just until Tsuji calls him a coward. To begin the fight, Tsuji takes off his shirt and tells Kenichi that real men use their fists instead of their words to fight. When Tsuji calls him a sissy, they get into a petty exchange of words, but the moment that Kenichi calls Tsuji a moron, he unlocks a dark side of him. Tsuji then rushes at Kenichi with great speed and aims his fist at his head, but Kenichi swiftly blocks it and lands a powerful punch at his opponent's head. Still, Tsuji attacks Kenichi again, and this time around, Kenichi punches him in his chest. Furunji is surprised to see this happening despite the fact that Tsuji is stronger than Kenichi. Kensei tells her that the outcome of a fight isn't determined by who is stronger. Tsuji dares Kenichi to punch him once more. This is confusing and scary to Kenichi, and to confirm his fears, when he punches Tsuji on the forehead, his fist takes the heat and becomes red, while Tsuji laughs hysterically and shows no signs of pain. Seeing this, Kensei says that it is almost inevitable for Kenichi to lose. Tsuji gets the upper hand and immobilizes Kenichi's foot before delivering a massive punch to his face, sending him to the ground. Furunji worries about Kenichi and Tsuji tells him to continue fighting or accept his defeat like a weakling. Kenichi stands up and tries to act tough, but Tsuji wastes no time in charging at him once again. He sees the punch coming and tries to counter it, but Tsuji is faster, and he smashes Kenichi's face with a flying uppercut. Kensei fears that Kenichi would soon face humiliation and defeat from Tsuji. Furunji tries to help out, but he tells her to be patient and proceeds to get her purple nurple on camera. Tsuji talks smack about his opponent's strength, forcing him to stand up again like nothing happened. Kenichi stands his ground as Tsuji rushes towards him with a fast punch, but he is thrown off guard when Tsuji headbutts him instead. He attempts to fight back with a kick, but his opponent blocks it and grabs his leg, causing Kenichi to lose balance and fall. Tsuji smacks his face with his foot and calls him a martial arts wannabe. Back at the dojo, Apachai and Shigeru nail some Lucky Charm dolls onto the trees to grant Kenichi divine protection. Akusei warns them that the elder would not be happy with their ritual, and soon enough the dude was chased away by the angry old man. Kenichi continues to get his butt kicked like a wimp. Furunji is really desperate to help out, but Kensei tells her to let him fight his own battles. Tsuji is surprised that Kenichi is still standing, and that the little twerp still has the guts to talk back at him. He threatens to rip Kenichi's body to shreds, but Kenichi isn't going down without a fight, so he tells him to bring it on. Tsuji's goons are all shocked at how confident Kenichi is, but they're also scared that their boss could end up killing him out of anger. Having had enough of Kenichi's loud mouth, Tsuji rushes in for the finishing move. However, Kenichi quickly intercepts it using a special technique that Furunji taught him earlier. Tsuji lands on the ground and Kensei expects Kenichi to finish him off, but he hesitates and fumbles for some reason. This allowed Tsuji to quickly put him in a leg lock and flip him over to the ground. Tsuji pounces on him and begins to pull his leg way beyond its normal limit. Furunji is about to jump out of the bushes to help him, but Kensei stops her once again. He points to the fact that Takeda had just arrived to save the day. Takeda punches Tsuji on the face before the maniac could snap Kenichi's leg like a drumstick. The goons tell Takeda that he had just broken the rules of their gang by attacking his superior. However, Takeda surprises them by revealing that he was no longer a member of the Ragnarok gang. The goons try to beat him up, but he takes them out in a matter of seconds with his fists. Suji tries to retaliate, but Takeda warns him to stay put unless he wants to suffer the same fate. Takeda grabs Kenichi and storms off, causing Suji to send his goons after him. They continue to chase after the two, and Takeda was about to give up when Kensei suddenly shows up to help them out. He breaks the bridge with a single strike, throwing all the goons into the river below. Furunji couldn't believe her eyes, and she concludes that Kensei was way stronger than he looked. Takeda rushes Kenichi to the dojo to get some treatment and bed rest. However, when he wakes up, he gets so many deadly stares from the senseis around that he wishes he was back on the streets. Akisame and the other senseis scold him for losing to Suji. Shio tells him to watch out because he was about to become a punching bag at school. Kenichi becomes very scared, and he takes comfort in Furunji's marshmallow chest. She tells him not to be afraid, but the thought of being bullied again drives him nuts. Kenichi couldn't remember much after the fight, so he asks how he got to the dojo. Kensei informs him that it was Takeda who brought him here. There was also Takeda who rescued him from getting annihilated by Tsuji. He says that Kenichi should learn to be more spontaneous and ruthless with his attacks in the future. At school, Kenichi sneaks around trying to avoid contact with the bullies. Nijima startles him and tells him that the whole school knows about his defeat. Soon after, a trio of huge seniors starts to chase him until they have him cornered. It's definitely the end of the line for Kenichi. However, Takeda shows up once again like a guardian angel. He threatens to make the punks bleed, and they all run off like chickens. Kenichi thanks him for saving him just like the last time. Takeda tells him not to sweat it because he owes him big time for saving his boxing career. They beat Yukita along the way, and Kenichi is scared that a fight is about to start between the two. However, Yukita congratulates Takeda for leaving the gang to follow his dreams. He promises to defend him against the goons at Ragnarok, but warns him to prepare for what's coming. Back at the dojo, Akisame gathers all the other senseis for a meeting. He proposes a new and intense training regimen to turn Kenichi into a fighting machine. The elder asks how this plan is going to work. Akisame explains that they would first make Kenichi become a permanent resident of the dojo. Then they would teach him martial arts until he was an inch away from death. All the senseis love this idea, and their eyes glow in anticipation. At the school pool, Furunji emerges from the water, much to the envy of all the other girls. She passes by two who wonder what they have to do to get a body like hers. On her way, she notices a commotion below and peeks to see Kenichi being chased by some delinquents. Azumi walks up to her and asks what her relationship with Kenichi is, seeing that they always meet up after club activities. Furunji replies that they are just friends. In the locker room, while Furunji gets dressed, she mistakenly spills that Kenichi will be staying in her house. Izumi overhears and vows to find out what is actually between the two. Kenichi ends up defeating the two bullies chasing after him and returns to the dojo, where he resumes training. He does one-handed push-ups under Ekisame's supervision, and the training ends early, much to Kenichi's surprise. He wonders why his master was suddenly nicer. Later on, he spars with Furunji, and she knocks him down quite easily. Sasaki intervenes, asking her to go easier on Kenichi, which further surprises him. He wonders if the whole dojo was plotting something evil, seeing how nice they all suddenly were. Kenichi bumps into Apachai, who accidentally lets out a hint that something was being planned. Kenichi's suspicions are further proven when Shiger tells him to run. In a meeting with the masters, he asks them for an explanation, and the elder asks him if he likes Ryuzanpaku, to which he answers yes. With this, the elder gets excited, and Akisame tells him that he will now be a resident disciple. However, after picturing what his life will be like, he takes to his heels in an attempt to escape, but is chased down by Akisame and all the other masters, who eventually corner him and tie him down. He protests aggressively, calling them murderers, but Kensei decides to take a different approach. He calmly explains to him the benefit of being a resident disciple, mentioning how he will be living under the same roof with Furunji and all the different scenarios that could play out. Kensei's explanation convinces Kenichi completely, and he immediately rushes home with joy to seek his parents' permission. At home, Kenichi's father is initially against the idea of his son moving into the dojo permanently, but he soon changes his mind, seeing the resolve and determination in his son's eyes. He grants him permission to leave as Hanuka protests, trying everything she could to stop him from leaving. Still, Kenichi leaves anyway, leaving behind his father, who breaks down in tears. Kenichi arrives at the gates of the dojo, stopping for a moment to imagine all the possible things he could do with Furunji. He is interrupted by Akisame, who jokes with him, and the two are soon joined by Furunji, who welcomes Kenichi warmly. However, when he enters the dojo, he meets all the masters standing behind the last door, oozing with an aura powerful enough to knock him out. When he wakes up, Sasaki tells him everything will be different henceforth, starting from how he addresses them, and he is made to continuously call Sasaki Master. Akisame then begs him not to die during the upcoming training, making him wonder what sort of training schedule they have for him. For this, Akisame asks him to imagine the worst training he could possibly do, and when he does, he tells him that the training schedule is much worse. Kenichi attempts to run away on hearing that, but is instantly pulled back into the dojo. His training kicks off almost immediately as he starts with a pull-up over a flaming stove, which Akisame fans. Akisame tells him he calls this training the Squid Dance. He further explains the reason for the training was to teach him how to push himself to the limit when he is at a corner. For his next training, he is greeted by Shigeru's Mighty Muffins as she places apples all over his body, which was in a pose. She asks him not to move as this training is supposed to test his bravery and proceeds to slash through all the apples with her sword as Akisame watches, brimming with satisfaction. Next, he is pushed around by Sasaki and made to walk on his hands. This training, as explained by Sasaki, is supposed to strengthen his arms to enable him to punch as well as he kicks. With Apachai, he promises not to do anything out of the ordinary during his training session, but as usual, Kenichi ends up being punched out of the training room. At night after the first day of training, Kenichi begins to wonder whether any of the scenarios he imagined with Furinji will ever play out, his hopes becoming bleak. He pulls out one of his self-help books on how to escape, and he begins plotting, but instantly realizes that the whole dojo was being patrolled. However, he finds a letter from his father that encourages him to stay. The masters overhear his vow to stay and decide to reward him, so they bring him out in the middle of the night, and Kensei tells him that he will be risking his life in the training exercise. Kensei takes him through the forest behind the dojo and explains that they would need to stealthily make their way to a hot spring through a path ensnared by deadly traps, where they could peek on the ladies bathing. With resilience and determination, they make their way through the forest, dodging and evading all the traps, their goal ever closer. Finally, they catch a glimpse of yellow hair, just like Furinji's, which gets them into a scuffle for who would peek first. Eventually, they are broken apart by the sudden appearance of the elder who had been the one in the hot springs all along. They are initially disappointed but soon become relaxed as they join in the hot spring, reaping the rewards of their painstaking journey. A week after Kenichi's departure, Honoka already misses him so much that she prepares to visit the dojo. She packs snacks for him with her mother while also imagining how comfortable Kenichi must be getting around the titsy witch Furinji. The following morning, Imisake wakes Kenichi very early for another grueling training session. This time around, Kenichi has to run while dragging Imisake on something tied to his waist and simultaneously trying to escape Imisake's whips. The next phase of his training is with Sasaki, who tells him to try landing a blow on him. Kenichi aims to strike Sasaki, but he gets brutally kicked and almost meets his ancestors if not for Furinji's timely breakfast announcement. Unfortunately, Kenichi isn't spared from the masters bullying even during breakfast because they all take turns in snatching pieces of his food away from his plate. However, he has improved a lot in fighting for himself. Later, he goes shopping with Furinji, and she tells him that shopping has become easier for her because of him. Kenichi tells her that he's willing to do anything for her. Although we can see the poor boy struggling as he walks with weights that his masters tied to his legs in addition to the heavy groceries on his back. It doesn't get any better because Kensei later adds some extra lovey-dovey weights to his legs. Meanwhile, Honoka arrives at the dojo, wondering why it always looks so shabby whenever she visits. She tries opening the door, but it is so heavy that she thinks it is locked. So she uses a bicycle to climb up to the roof, but just then, Apache meets her there, so she immediately runs to hide behind a pole. When it looks like the hide-and-seek game is over, Honoka sneaks in through the gate, but she falls flat and Apache immediately shows up. Apache nicely introduces himself, but Honoka instantly launches a cookie attack on him and tries moving away from him. He gets in her way again, and she launches another attack with a different snack item. She continues to throw the snacks she stocked up for Kenichi until she has just one food left. Honoka decides to make a run for it, but she accidentally slips off the roof. Expecting a hard crash, Honoka is surprised when her fall is buffered, only to find that Apachai rescued her. She finally accepts that not everyone in the shabby dojo is an enemy and instantly becomes besties with Apachai. They go to look for Kenichi, but he's nowhere to be found in the dojo. Just then, Shigeru's mouse hops into her bag and steals Kenichi's lunch. When she meets Shigeru, she sees another Titsy sister to be worried about. Later, Apachai and Shigeru are clueless on what to serve the little girl, and the best they could come up with was a disgusting tea. Honoka is deeply disturbed by the tea they serve her, so she immediately gives them a tea-making tutorial, which makes them call her a genius. After a stressful day walking with weights and pretending to be okay just to impress Furinji, Kenichi returns only to find his younger sister having a field day with Apachai and Shiger. Honoka runs to welcome Kenichi, but he harshly tells her that she shouldn't be visiting because he's trying to focus on mastering karate. Although Furinji tells her she can visit whenever she feels like it, Honoka glares at her in a way that a jealous younger sister will. Emisake later calls Kenichi for training, and the first person he has to train with is Furinji. After watching their fight, Honoka warns her about harming her brother, but she only gets a suffocating hug, head buried in Furinji's glory. Next, Kenichi trains with Apachai and gets buried in the ground. Seeing this, Honoka becomes teary-eyed, so Apachai reassures her that he doesn't mean any harm to her brother. The final training was with Emisake, and when Honoka saw how badly beaten up her brother was, she begged for it to stop, saying they were only mercilessly beating up her brother, all in the name of training. However, Emisake showed her that they were not just beating Kenichi up for no reason when Kenichi got up for another round with a really determined, fearless look. Honoka remembered the look in Kenichi's eyes from years ago when he tried to fend off some bullies who were bothering her. She finally accepted that they were only trying to train her brother because they saw a gem in him. As she leaves later that night, Kenichi tells Honoka to limit her visitation because he doesn't want her to see him getting his behind kicked by the masters, so she promises not to come see him again. The next morning, Honoka is seated, playing games with Apachai and Shiger, so Kenichi scolds her about it. She reminds him that her promise was that she won't visit him specifically, and as such, she was only here to visit Apachai and Shiger, not just on that day, but every other day. The next morning, Izumi tries to ask Kenichi out on a date, but Furinji interrupts her, telling Kenichi that it is time to go home. She also tells Izumi that they now live together, and this bothers Kenichi because he doesn't want to give anyone the idea that they are cohabiting. However, he's already too late because Takashima overheard their conversation and is planning to report Furinji to the teachers. As expected, Furinji receives a call informing her that the teachers will be paying her home a visit the following day. Initially, Kenichi sees no reason for her to panic, but when the masters display their 5 seconds of madness, Kenichi becomes concerned. Furinji calls them to order and tells them to act appropriately for the upcoming visit, so Sasaki and Abakai say they'll display their impressive karate skills for them, but Furinji advises them not to because that could get kicked out of school. Kenichi tells her not to tell the teachers about their cohabitation, but Furinji cruelly dismisses him, saying that they were never cohabiting in the first place. To act like her father, Furinji appointed Aikisame, but he said he had other things to do, and she was disappointed. Furinji became sad because her only surviving family member, her grandfather, wasn't around and there was no one else to play the role of her parents, and she already registered her parents' names in her school documents. Moved by her sadness, Apake decides to play the role of her father, but that is really just a big joke because they're not even from the same country, and neither was Kensei. The only viable option left is to let Sasaki play the fatherly role while Shiger will play the role of her mother. However, Aikisame was against the idea of deceiving Furinji's teachers, who were genuinely concerned about her well-being. Her head teacher informs his assistant that she will be coming along for the house visit, but the teacher wonders why they are visiting Furinji because she's an excellent student. However, the man explains that despite her good grades, he feels that Furinji isn't settling well in the school because he once saw her fighting on the rooftop, and now she's reportedly living in the same house with a freshman. The head teacher was genuinely concerned about her well-being, and this visit was of utmost importance to him. Back at the dojo, Furinji has printed out the roles of each parent just as she stated in her school documents, with different names and professions. For their occupations, Sasaki is a jet pilot, while Shiger is a fashion designer, but the poor quality of their rehearsals makes Furinji and Kenichi see how hopeless the situation seems. Kensei tells them that he told Apachai to hide until her teachers leave. To make matters worse, her teachers arrived just at that instant, and the assistant teacher spotted Apachai hiding above them while he helped them open the gate. The woman is shocked and calls the head teacher's attention, but he immediately gets distracted by Furinji's timely intervention. When they get into the dojo, the male teacher introduces himself as Yasunaga, while the female teacher is Ono. When it is Sasaki's turn, he introduces himself as Seiga Furinji but fumbles in naming his occupation because he literally says that he's an airplane jet and forgets how old he is. It doesn't get better with Shiger as she doesn't even get Furinji's teachers and somehow slices a fly into two. It was at this moment that Furinji knew she was in deep shit. After Sasaki is asked some questions related to his supposed career, Kenichi immediately creates a distraction to excuse him. With Shiger alone, she first calls the male teacher a baldy, but when he asks her some questions about Furinji, she gives surprisingly perfect answers. Ms. Ono then takes an excuse to ease herself and is escorted by Furinji, who leaves abruptly. The intention of her visit to the toilet is to see its hygiene and judge the family accordingly. As soon as she opens the toilet door, she sees Apachai and they both freak out, and Apachai immediately disappears. On the other hand, Yasunaga tells Shigeru to quit the act because he can tell that she's not Furunji's real mother. But she tells him not to pick on Furunji because despite her flaws, she's still a very good kid. Yet Yasunaga tells Shigeru that they came to confirm the rumor of cohabitation between Kenichi and Furunji, because if it is indeed true, that it would put the kids in some serious trouble. This is the final straw for Shigeru, and she immediately pulls out a knife, but Kensei quickly wraps her in chains and Kenichi rescues the terrified Yasunaga, pulling him away from the war zone. At this point, the entire house is chaotic and Furunji is in a state of shock. When he catches a breather, Yasunaga asks Kenichi what he's doing in Furunji's house. Kenichi tries to explain that there's nothing twisted to it, but Yasunaga insists that it's the same thing as cohabitation. While this confrontation is still going on, Apachai and Onna burst out through the wall, so Yasunaga and Furunji resume the race for their survival. Finally, they find refuge in the Forbidden Room, which is filled with statues that remind Yasunaga of Japanese history, being himself a history teacher. As he begins to appreciate the artistry, the others rush into the room and accidentally cause a stockpile of deities to wobble and fall into each other. Everyone thinks that Yasunaga will be buried under these, but the Elder surprisingly comes to his rescue and introduces himself as the Elder while apologizing for the chaotic state of the house. It was all thanks to Akisame for using all that was within his power to bring him back. Yasunaga also becomes excited to see that the beautiful artworks were the famous master Kotsuji's masterpieces, and Kenichi wonders if there's anything Akisame isn't a genius at. Later, the grandfather clarifies the situation to Yasunaga, who said he is envious to see that the children are being taught by the Grandmaster Akisame. He also tells Kenichi that he has noticed how much manlier he has become due to his training and that he should keep up the good work. Later, Akisame goes to the Forbidden Room and realizes that there is so much cleaning to do, so Kenichi offers to take care of it and let Furunji rest from the mentally exhausting day. Akisame finds a wooden cat and has a sad expression on his face because the cat was carved by his best friend, the late Seiga Furunji. Later, Furunji rests on her grandfather's lap, and he tells her that even though the house members are not her blood relatives, she could still consider them as family. While she slept, she was still talking about them in her sleep, so Kenichi realized that although the dojo was a crazy place to live in, it was home to Furunji. During his practice with Furunji the following morning, Kenichi is unable to launch a single attack and tells Kensei that he's suffering because he can't find an opening. Kensei tells him that he has to prolong the fight to find an opening. However, when he eventually finds one, Kenichi delays his move and ends up being defeated by Furunji. He later finds out that even the opening he spotted was a deliberate move by Furunji to help him land an attack on her. This is not great news to Kenichi because he feels like a total loser who is being pitied by the girl he likes, and Furunji feels bad for helping out in that situation. Meanwhile, as Hanoka prepares to leave the dojo, her father manages to sneak in a rifle in his winter coat, telling his wife that he wants to pay a quick visit to Kenichi's wonderful masters. Knowing her husband, Kenichi's mom calls him back and wonders why he's dressed in a winter coat in the middle of summer, so she holds him back and tells him that he's going nowhere with a gun. Hanoka later whistles for her ride, and Apachai basically flies to meet her and lands dramatically. Her father pulls out his rifle and calls Apachai a monster, but Mrs. immediately knocks her husband's silliness out of him. While Hanoka leaves with Apachai, Kenichi complains about having to climb up a rope to get into his room, so Akisame explains that it all happened one night when they Sakaki and Kensei got a little drunk and destroyed the staircase. Initially, Kenichi wanted to discuss with Akisame, but he leaves, so he goes to Sakaki to tell him about why he was unable to strike Furunji during their training. Sakaki tells him that he has no advice for weaklings, but he feels that Kenichi was probably scared of the counterattack. He further explains that a man's worth is determined by his ability to decide whether to strike or not in a life and death situation. Meanwhile, Apachai, Hanoka, and Shigeru are having the time of their lives on random people's rooftops. While Kenichi reflects on Sakaki's advice, he is interrupted by a random intruder and his men who introduce themselves as the karate master of the Shiken Adori style, Ganzai Kumatori. They say they are here to challenge the dojo masters of Ryozen-Paku and take the sign. Kenichi frantically runs to tell Furunji, but she explains to him that no one is around. Furunji then approaches the intruders with tea, which they reject, saying they are here for a challenge and not to drink around. She offers them the dojo register for challengers, which states that a challenger has to pay 10,000 yen and get the opportunity to attack them as a group if they all pay individually. The leader of the intruders pays the fee to fight one-on-one against Sasaki, but Furunji tells him that no one is around and she would take up his challenge. Feeling insulted, the leader gets angry and attempts to hit her from behind, only to be interrupted by movements from Kenichi. Kenichi jumps out and takes up the challenge himself, vowing to protect Furinji. This further angers the intruder's leader, who strikes at Kenichi. For a moment, Kenichi was convinced he would be able to find an opening, only to be dramatically kicked away. While Kenichi bleeds on the floor, the leader of the intruders insults the dojo masters for training weaklings like Kenichi and says he would just proceed to take the sign. Kenichi, unable to sit and take up the insults, musters enough courage to stand back to his feet and challenges the intruders once more. The intruder's leader, seeing this, tells Kenichi that another kick would kill him, so he offers to give Kenichi an opening to strike first. Kenichi wavers and shakes while trying to muster the confidence to strike, and in this moment he remembers his training from before, and with a fluid step forward, he strikes with all his might, catching the leader off guard at a time when his muscles were relaxed. Wounded and in pain, the leader charges for Kenichi with a death blow, which is stopped short by Sasaki, who appears from nowhere. He explains that he had been watching all along, all the while overpowering the intruder's leader. In a single sweep, he effortlessly defeats all the intruders, leaving both Kenichi and Furinji in shock. Sasaki himself expresses disappointment at how weak the intruders were. The rest of the masters return to clear the unconscious bodies of the intruders from their dojo, sending them to the clinic on a wooden wheelbarrow. The following day, Kenichi asks Amasake for a day off, and with reluctance, Amasake agrees, saying they could all go to the beach. Excited, Kenichi runs to tell Furinji, happy that he might finally be able to spend time with her outside the dojo. In his room, he goes through one of his self-help books, only to realize he was being pried on by Sasaki, Kensai, and Apachai. He gets embarrassed, but shakes it off. Subsequently, they get on a ship, and Hanoka finds out they built it themselves. She expresses concern about the ship's integrity, worrying even more when she finds out this was the second ship they built. Amasake asks Furinji to navigate as he notices the ship was not moving as fast as he wanted. He checks on the engine, in which Kenichi was tirelessly trying to run all by himself, but he was worn out completely. Seeing this, Amasake and Sasaki decide to take over, running the engine and increasing the boat's speed tremendously. The whole crew holds on dearly as the ship zooms across the ocean surface. Soon, they arrive at an island that was conveniently named after the elder. They get to a large beach house, and everyone changes into their beach clothes, to which Kensei takes pictures of the ladies. Kenichi begins to realize that this would not be as ordinary as a vacation that he wanted, as he is ushered by Sasaki and Amasake to jump off a cliff into the water. They explain to him that this was to test his courage. While he argued with them about how he has courage and doesn't need to jump off a cliff for that, Shigeru casually walks past, undresses to their awe, and jumps off the cliff without any hesitation. Initially, they get worried about her safety, but she eventually pops out, saying that there aren't any rocks in the area. Back on the cliff, Kenichi kneels down, defeated, as he explains to Sasaki and Amasake that he can't swim, to which they say only makes them more excited. While they were still trying to convince him to jump, the elder swiftly picks him up and dive bombs the both of them into the ocean below, knocking out Kenichi in the process. Kenichi wakes up to see everyone having fun and overhears the masters talking about how they will intensify his training, so he plans to escape, which he does quite easily by tricking Kensei. Soon, they realize he is missing and begin a hunt for him. In another part of the island, Apachai and Hanoka are building a face in the sand, but notice everyone else is missing, and Apachai decides to go and investigate. Kenichi finds himself by a riverbank, plotting ways to leave the island. He decides that the only way out is through the ship, which will be heavily guarded, and realizes that his only choice is to hide for a couple of days. Soon after, he finds Shigeru fishing along the riverbank. He tries to run away, but she spots him quickly and pins him to the rock with an arrow. Shigeru listens to him complain about the rigorous training he realized he would be put through and why he wanted to run away. He also tells her about his inability to swim, to which she offered to teach him. She takes him to the river upstream and tells him to go with the flow of the current, and sure enough, without panicking, he begins to swim before he realizes. While swimming, he notices Shigeru's smile for the first time. That does not last long as she drags him back to the cliff, believing that he would jump off it now that he was able to swim, a notion he protests heavily. While they argue and fight about him jumping, his sister calls out to him from the ocean below, and he notices she is surrounded by what he thought to be dolphins, but Shigeru explains that they are actually sharks. Without hesitation, he dives into the ocean, attempting to fight off the sharks as Shigeru supports him from the cliff with her bow and arrow. Kenichi manages to fight off one of the sharks but is soon overwhelmed. He is saved by the elder, who runs across the ocean's surface and brutally beats all the sharks to death, successfully saving both Hanoka and Kenichi, after which he acknowledges Kenichi's unwavering courage, saying he reminds him of his younger self. At the dojo, Kenichi's masters discuss whether he is ready to learn the advanced techniques or not. Akisame and Kensei think it's time for Kenichi to be taught the advanced skills, but Sakaki believes that he's just a kid and his body isn't prepared for it, so he could just die from the advanced training. Apakai believes that if everyone takes their time to train Kenichi without being too hard on him, he will survive these new techniques. When Akisame asks Kenichi if he feels he is ready, he says he needs more time, even though Akisame doesn't really have much patience. While watering the plants at school, Kenichi is approached by Takeda, whose arm has recovered to the extent that he has joined the school's boxing club. Kenichi asks if anyone from Ragnarok has approached him, but he says no one has because they've been too busy with other things. Kenichi tells him to let him know if he is ever in any trouble so he can help out. Takeda appreciates him for offering his help and bids him goodbye as he dashes off in a hurry. Kenichi continues to water the bushes but is startled when Nijima stands up from within the bushes. Nijima asks Kenichi if he has heard that Kizaru Nanju will be joining the Seven Deadly Fists, but Kenichi doesn't know who she is, so Nijima tells him that she is a member of Ragnarok who has steadily risen through their ranks and is also a sophomore year student at their school. She is a taekwondo whiz who has been sending goons after Kenichi and goes by the nickname Valkyrie. Kenichi is not only unaware of who she is but also of who the Seven Deadly Fists are, and Nijima explains that they are the most powerful members of Ragnarok, feared by all members of the gang. Nijima blames Kenichi for not attempting to defeat Kizaru, allowing her to scale through the ranks of Ragnarok. Nijima discloses another one of his numerous plans to Kenichi, a plan that involves Kenichi seeking a rematch with Tsuji, who is wallowing in unhappiness following Kizaru's latest promotion to the higher enviable ranks. When Kenichi expresses his sympathy for Tsuji, Nijima kicks him mercilessly. He adds that Ragnarok has appointed Tsuji to punish Takeda, and if he doesn't intervene, Takeda could get beat up so bad that he will have to give up boxing. Nijima tells him he is going to get some information on the fists that may be useful to him, and tells him not to lose to Tsuji. On their way back to the dojo, Furinji commends Kenichi for his recent toughness, and he proudly tells her that since his feats with the sharks on the beach, he lost his fears and can now take on anything. Furinji then spots Tsuji as he is about to get into a fight with a girl. She tells Kenichi that if he truly has that much confidence, he should help defend the girl from Tsuji. Seeing the thug, Kenichi immediately cowered. However, before the fight, it turns out that Tsuji and the girl are from the same gang. And this fight ensued because Tsuji was bypassed as the next in line, so the girl was picked instead. Unaware of who this girl is, Kenichi lands a flying kick on Tsuji that knocks him out cold, giving no second thoughts as he effortlessly sends Tsuji's goose flying. After playing the whole hero act, Kenichi gets into a conversation with the girl he saves and is caught by surprise when she introduces herself as Kizaru Nanju. She compliments his fighting skills and gets prepared for a fight, saying that she's been looking forward to fighting him for a while. Furinji deduces from Kizaru's stance that she is a skilled fighter and warns Kenichi, but he tells her not to worry because he doesn't hit girls. Furinji jokingly points out how he tries to hit her all the time while sparring with her at the dojo, and this makes Kenichi explain nervously why he has too. Kenichi's refusal to fight makes Kizaru angry, and she throws a kick at his face but doesn't hit him, while expressing her disgust at the whole gender game Kenichi was playing. She tells him not to get full of himself just because his sneak attack worked on Tsuji. Kenichi didn't know that Tsuji wasn't looking, so the realization that his flying kick was a cowardly move makes him start apologizing to a passed-out Tsuji. Kizaru has somewhere she needs to be and decides to postpone her duel with Kenichi. She tells him that she's after Takeda as well and will consider leaving him alone if Kenichi defeats her. Kenichi contemplates whether to fight Kizaru or not, but Furinji tells him not to bother because she is much stronger and more experienced than he is. She tells him he needs to at least be able to score a point against her during training in order to stand a chance against Kizaru, and so he realizes that the best way for him to get stronger is through advanced skill training. That night, a rival gang calls out the Ragnarok for a battle, but only the 8 Deadly Fists show up. The rival gang feels disrespected, so they charge at them. The leader of the 8 sends only 3 of them, Loki the 4th, Hermit the 6th, and Kizaru the 8th, who beat up and subdue all 50 goons sent by the gang in mere minutes. All the while, Nijima has been hiding and observing the whole thing. The next day, Sakaki asks Kenichi if he's ready to learn the advanced techniques, but he avoids answering him and leaves for school. Sasaki decides to force the training on Kenichi, but the elder says to give him time to come around because he will eventually need that training. At school, Kenichi reminisces over the events of the previous day. On their way back to the dojo, he confesses to Furinji that he is worried about the training for the advanced techniques and letting his masters down if he can't master them due to his lack of talent, but Furinji assures him that the masters would never give up on him. Haru suddenly appears and tells Kenichi to turn back because Tsuji is waiting for him ahead, eager to settle the score. Despite Nijima's persistent warnings, Kenichi insists on meeting Tsuji to straighten things out even if it means facing him. Tsuji is determined to get back at Kenichi because his reputation has been tarnished since he lost their previous fight and most of his goons have deserted him. Kenichi apologizes and tries to explain, but Tsuji isn't interested in hearing anything except Kenichi's screams of pain. He throws a punch at Kenichi, but Kenichi quickly dodges and counters with a punch that sends Tsuji flying, surprising even Kenichi with his own strength. Furinji tells Kenichi how grown he has become, finally respecting the strength he has gained from all of his training. She adds that it's because the master sees potential and know that he has now developed the strength to learn and endure the advanced techniques. Tsuji accepts defeat and tells his goons to leave him and join another gang, concluding that he has lost his value because he now no longer has men under his command. As he turns to leave, Kenichi comforts him and tells him that having friends was more valuable than having henchmen. Tsuji decides to start a new gang with his friends and warns Kenichi about Ragnarok's plans for Takeda. They organize a fatal beating up ahead, which will be executed by Kisara's group and overseen by a member of the Eight Fists called Hermit. When they return to the dojo, Kenichi tells Akasame that he is ready to learn the advanced techniques, and they decide to get started. Kenichi has overcome his fears and is prepared to face the challenges of advanced training. At school, Kenichi tells Takeda, while at the boxing club, that he needs to be more careful and should avoid going out a lot because Ragnarok is planning to give him a farewell beat-up for leaving them. But Takeda doesn't sound like he takes the threat seriously, and this makes Kenichi worried. Meanwhile, Mijima is up to his usual shenanigans as he spreads exaggerated news about Kenichi defeating Tsuji in the school paper. Kenichi sees him handing out copies of the paper near the boxing club and tries to approach him, but he takes to his heels before Kenichi can get to him. Kenichi then gives Takeda his phone number and tells him to give him a call if he is ever in trouble, but Takeda says he would rather have Furinji's number instead. At the dojo after school, Kenichi is ready to begin learning the advanced techniques. Sakaki goes first by demonstrating a karate technique. Using the technique, he deflects Kenichi's attack with one hand and hits his chin with the same hand. Then he explains to Kenichi that it's an effective technique to use when fighting multiple opponents at the same time. Apakai comes forward to demonstrate his technique but starts crying because he is not sure if Kenichi will survive the demonstration. Akasame knows the dangers of this technique, so he takes Kenichi's place for the demonstration. Apache's technique is the roundhouse strike. With this technique, he lands an almost guaranteed spinning elbow strike on the opponent's head, but Akasame is aware of this and blocks his elbow before it makes contact with his head. Akasame steps forward and demonstrates his technique, which is a special combo of strikes that he demonstrates on Kenichi, leaving him on the ground in pain. Kensai steps up to demonstrate his technique as well, but Kenichi begs him to give him a break. So he decides that the first 3 techniques will be enough for his first day of learning advanced techniques, and that he and Shiger would have to teach Kenichi their techniques some other time. Kenichi is on his knees wondering if he has enough talent to master the techniques his masters demonstrated. As if hearing his thoughts, Akasame tells him that no talent is needed and that he just needs to learn a little bit at a time. Just then, Furinji walks in and tells Akasame that Takeda has come for his bone-setting appointment, so Akasame proceeds to the clinic, leaving Kenichi in the hands of Apakai and Sakaki. At the clinic, Akasame examines Takeda and sees that he is healed up pretty well, but he notices that something is bothering him and asks him about it. Takeda tells him that he is thinking about how in martial arts people get injured all the time, treat themselves only to get injured again. This is a bit funny and ironic to him. Akasame tells him that people are born only to die, meaning it would be easier not to be born in the first place. This is how he used to think, but he tells Takeda that he realizes that it's about what you do while you're alive. Akasame takes him to the dojo where Kenichi is being beat up while learning Sakaki's technique. He tells him of how Kenichi is working hard to learn those techniques so he can protect him. Akasame also tells him that he has realized that Kenichi exerts true courage when he fights to protect people he cares about. Kenichi finally pulls off Sakaki's technique, but Sakaki blocks his counter and gives him light praise. Apakai's technique is more gruesome, and after a few rounds, it leaves Kenichi in a funny mental state. So Sakaki pours some water on him, but that only revives him until he comes back to his senses fully when Master Sakaki uses his knee to apply pressure on his back. Just then, Takeda is about to leave and Furinji informs Kenichi, who rushes to catch up with him and starts scolding him for not listening to him and going out by himself. But Akasame tells him about Takeda's bone-setting appointment. Kenichi asks Takeda if he saved his number, but he didn't, so he puts it in Takeda's phone himself and makes him promise to call him if he has any problems. After this, Takeda bids him farewell and takes his leave. On his way home, Takeda is ambushed by Ragnarok, but he doesn't call Kenichi like he promised. Among the people sent were Kizara and Yukita, who was his buddy while he was a member of Ragnarok. Yukita begins to attack the people he came with, revealing his real intention, which is to leave Ragnarok as well and help Takeda. The goons attack the both of them. In the middle of the fight, a Ragnarok member falls down and hits Takeda's phone, and its speed dials Kenichi. Apakai picks up the call but doesn't hear anyone, so Kenichi collects the phone to answer the call. However, all he can hear are inaudible words and sounds of struggle, like people are fighting. Kensai collects the phone from Kenichi and is able to decipher a few words. Then Apakai tells Kenichi to use his phone to trace the call, but he tells him his phone can't. Kensai tells them to be silent, and by listening closely, he hears the sound of a train going over elevated tracks above where the fight was happening. He then asks Furinji for a map and the student registry to trace the route Takeda will use to go home and where that route might intersect with elevated train tracks. Kenichi and Furinji can go and help him. Back at the fight scene, Yukita and Takeda are holding up, but there are a lot of goons to fight and Kizara is tired of watching by the sidelines. She steps in to join the fight and tells Takeda she isn't going to go easy on him. Despite knowing how formidable she is, Takeda isn't willing to back out. Kenichi and Furinji make their way to where Takeda is fighting Kizara's crew but can't seem to find the exact spot. Furinji climbs a tall pole to get better view and spots them. Then she tells Kenichi, and they continue to the scene. At the fight scene, Takeda and Yukita defeat all the members of Kizara's crew, and now they're going to fight the final boss, Kisara. She tells them to come at her together, but Yukita goes first and grabs her by her shirt, then throws her at a wall. She steps on the wall, jumps back, and sends Yukita flying with her flying kick. Takeda comes at her, throwing a couple of jabs but misses. Then she stops his fist with the sole of her boot and counters his attack with a swinging kick, which he is quick to dodge. But he does not see her second attack, which is another kick to the center of his head. He falls down to his knees in pain but remembers seeing how determined and unrelenting Kenichi is during training. This makes him stand up despite the pain to continue fighting Kisara. He throws a punch at her but misses as she jumps high into the air right before his fist reaches her and kicks him so hard she sends him flying into a fence. Koga, a member of Kizara's crew who was thrown far away by Yukita earlier in the fight, comes back only to see that Kizara has defeated both Takeda and Yukita. He asks her if it's okay for them to do what they want to then, and she does not object. So he and the rest of the crew begin beating up an already beaten up Takeda and Yukita as payback for what they did to them at the beginning of the fight. As revenge for throwing him, Koga wants to break Yukita's arm and climbs a pavement so he can jump and get enough momentum on landing on Yukita's arm. But before he can do so, Kenichi punches him from the back and steps into the scene. Kenichi looks around and spots Takeda on the ground, badly beaten up, and this makes him mad. So he starts beating the members of Kizara's crew into a pulp. Kisara is about to attack him when Furinji comes up and tells her that she will be her opponent since Kenichi promised himself he wouldn't fight girls. Kisara notices Furinji's two outstanding features and is annoyed out of jealousy that she calls her a cow. But this hurts her feelings. Kisara tells her that she's going to kill her if she doesn't get out of her way. Then she throws a kick at her, but she evades by jumping up, so Kisara tries to strike her while she is airborne, but Furinji sends her flying with a counter kick. Back at the dojo, all four of Kenichi's masters are talking about him and Shigeru is worried because she hasn't seen him. Apakai is worried as well, but Sakaki tells Shigeru that Kenichi has gone to help his friend and that she shouldn't worry because he isn't going to lose since Furinji is with him. Back at the fight scene, Kenichi is whooping the asses of the members of Kizara's crew while Takeda and Yukita struggle with their injuries. Some members of Kizara's crew see Takeda and Yukita moving and then start beating them again. Kenichi sees them and realizes that Yukita must have been trying to help Takeda, but got beat up as well. This makes him even angrier, so he starts throwing the Ragnarok douchebags around like snowballs. He throws one against an aluminum fence and then tries to hit him with a flying kick, but he dodges and his leg gets stuck in the fence. One of the goons charges at him, trying to strike him with a rod, but he uses Sakaki's counter technique on him and knocks him out. Furinji gets distracted by one of the goons who is about to attack Kenichi when Kizara throws a kick aimed at her head, but she dodges it in the nick of time and says it's time to put an end to their fight. But this pisses Kizara off because she sounds so sure of herself and hasn't been pronouncing her name properly. She throws a kick at Furinji, but right at the moment of impact, she seems to disappear, so Kizara looks up thinking she jumped but doesn't see her because she is beneath her. Furinji kicks her standing leg, causing her to fall, and just as her head is about to hit the ground, she puts her leg under Kizara's head to cushion her fall. Otherwise, she would have died. As Kenichi is trying to get his foot out of the fence, a member of Kizara's gang with a knife rushes towards him, trying to stab him, but is hit in the head with a baseball bat by none other than Nijima, who, just like all superheroes, has come in at the dying minute to save the day. But Nijima isn't alone. He came with his crew, and this makes the members of Kizara's crew withdraw. This is all part of Nijima's plan to take all the fruits of victory without hurting even one of his own guys. And no one else knows of this besides him. Nijima didn't tell Kenichi that he has a crew, and he claims they are both his and Kenichi's men, who are called the Shinpaku Alliance. Kenichi goes to check on Takeda and scolds him for not calling like he promised, so he apologizes and tells him he didn't call because he didn't want to get him mixed up in it. Kenichi realizes that this is just like the time when Takeda lost the use of his left arm because he was trying to protect him, and he is blaming himself. But Takeda tells him that he and Yukita have overcome the farewell beat-up and have won all the way, which makes him happy. At school, Kenichi pressures Nijima to explain what the Shinpaku Alliance is, but he keeps playing dumb and dodges the question. After some pressuring by Kenichi, he tells him that it's all part of his scheme to achieve his lifelong dream of ruling the world. He says he will need Kenichi's help if he's going to pull it off because he is going to combine his brawn with his superior intelligence. Kenichi begins to slap him furiously to snap him out of whatever has gotten into his head, but he slaps him a little too hard, and Nijima passes out. Just then, some members of the Shinpaku Federation are by the door and about to enter, so Kenichi hides. When they come in, he sneaks out. Izumi, one of Kenichi's classmates, comes running towards him, shouting his name like a maiden in distress. She tells him that she saw a guy in a karate outfit hanging around the gardening club. She thinks the punks who have been causing her trouble are back and has come to ask for his help. Kenichi rushes over to the gardening club only to find out that the guy in the karate outfit was Yukita, who was there with Takeda. They had come to thank him for his bravery and for helping them the other night. Yukita has also joined the school's judo club and is mentoring its current members. After being pressured by Takeda, he admits to Kenichi that he is in his debt and will always help him out when he can. At Kizara's hideout, she takes her anger and frustration out on her crew members while she trains. One of her crew members brings her direct orders from the hermit, ordering her not to go after the Shinpaku Alliance. She is desperate for revenge and is willing to disobey an order from her superior to get it. She orders her lackeys to capture and bring Furinji to her. She is looking to create an accident that will result in a clash between her crew and the Shinpaku Alliance. Back at the dojo, Kenichi is doing some stretches and boasting to his younger sister about how he defeated all the members of Kizara's crew by himself. Kensai quickly bursts his bubble by pointing out that it was, in fact, Furinji who took down Kizara, not him. Adding more salt to Kenichi's emotional wound, he mentions how Kenichi would have been stabbed if not for Nijima's timely intervention. Akusame concurs with Kensai, telling Kenichi that he needs to focus on mastering the advanced techniques. In town, Nijima and the members of the Shinpaku Alliance are parading when they get to a bridge and someone is standing in their way. Unknown to everyone else except Nijima, this man is the esteemed member Ragnarok number 6 of the 8 Deadly Fists, Hermit. One of Nijima's men charges at him and is thrown into the river. Nijima orders all his men to head back and tells them that he will defeat the stranger in their path all alone. Once they are gone, he gets on his hands and knees and grovels before Hermit because he knows he's no match for Hermit where combat abilities are concerned. Hermit is only interested in knowing where Kenichi trains and who trains him, but Nijima doesn't know either. After stalling, he throws sand at Hermit, then jumps into the river and swims to where one of the members of his alliance is and drags him into the sewer. He has mastered all the sewer tunnels in the city and will use them to evade Hermit. He decides to find out where Kenichi trains and who trains him as well. On their way back home from school the next day, Kenichi complains to Furinji about how he still hasn't gotten the hang of this advanced level of training yet. She encourages him, telling him he has improved a great deal, praises him, and gives him some advice on how to take his fighting stance properly. All the while, Nijima is stalking the both of them because he knows Kenichi won't tell him if he comes out and asks. He decides to tail Kenichi home. Eventually, they get home and the door is locked behind them, so Nijima sneaks up to the door and tries opening it, but is too weak. He eventually gives up and he sits down leaning against the door, which opens suddenly, making him fall backward. Standing above him is Shigeru, who he sees then stands up and tells her he is Kenichi's friend. Shigeru leaves him in and suddenly disappears after he looks away for a second. He roams around shouting Kenichi's name, then bumps into Appakai and thinks he is Pillar because of how stiff his muscles are. Nijima becomes terrified when he catches a full glimpse of him, thinking he's a monster. Overcome by fear, he makes for the gate, but is caught by surprise when Shigeru appears upside down hanging on the door like a bat on a branch. He runs back inside only to find Sakaki during one of his personal training sessions and is terrified of him as well. He runs into a room where Ekisame is and is terrified of him as well. He runs out and leans against a wall, then looks up and sees Furinji's dad towering above him like a giant. He suffers a meltdown and begins shouting at the top of his voice, causing Kenichi to hear him and come to his rescue. Kenichi tells his masters to give Nijima some space to digest all that had happened, and they all leave. This makes Nijima surprised at how obedient the masters are to Kenichi, and he thinks they are monsters under his command. He begins to imagine how with these monsters, not just Japan, but the whole world is his for the taking. Kenichi grabs him by the shirt and starts slapping sense into him like he did the previous day. Just like the previous day, he goes too far and Nijima's cheeks get swollen. The next day at school, Izumi finally summons the courage to invite Kenichi to her house. However, on her way, she bumps into him in a messy entanglement. Eventually, she asks him to follow her home, but he turns her down, saying that he promised to go shopping with Furinji. Izumi is disappointed that Furinji has beaten her again. When Nijima spots Kenichi and Izumi, he suspects that there's a love triangle between Furinji, Kenichi, and Izumi. He begins to scheme on how he can create a rift between Furinji and Kenichi, to have Furinji all to himself and add her to his group. To do this, he creates a scenario where Kenichi and Izumi fall in love, leaving Furinji by herself, creating a window for the twisted Nijima to take advantage. As Izumi walks by, Nijima calls her and asks her if she has been troubled by a romantic interest in Kenichi. She initially denies it, but Nijima finally lures her, and she gives in. The scheme promises to take her to Kenichi's dojo and instructs her to look as attractive and appealing as she can. On her way, Izumi feels like she has signed a deal with an evil monster, but she keeps her hopes up, believing that Nijima could be the Cupid that will create her love story with Kenichi. However, Izumi shows up late to meet Nijima, but unfortunately, she dresses like a church girl and Nijima finds this really disappointing, wondering why she couldn't be seductively dressed. When he prepares Izumi to walk into the dojo, they are startled by the sudden emergence of Kenichi through the wall with chains strapped around his ankle, preventing him from trying to run away. Izumi attempts to rescue him but is stopped by Shigeru's Mighty Muffins and realizes Furinji is not the only endowed lady in Kenichi's life. Shigeru continues to drag Kenichi across the floor and Izumi once again tries to run to his rescue, but is again stopped by Akisame, whom she remembers having once saved her. Once more, she tries rescuing Kenichi, but is again stopped by the flutter of Kensei's camera as he takes multiple pictures of her, causing her to go red with embarrassment. She is further startled by Apachai's sudden appearance behind her and wonders what sort of place the dojo is and why Kenichi is there. Kenichi begins his training with Apachai and soon enough he's knocked out cold, so Furinji wakes him up with a bucket of cold water, which makes Izumi upset and she confronts her about the dojo's cruel treatment of Kenichi. Sasaki worsens matters by suggesting that next time Kenichi will be woken up with a kettle of boiling water. To calm the tense situation, Akisame suggests for them to take a break and invites everyone to tea. Around the tea table, Kenichi asks Nijima what evil schemes he has under his sleeves, and this leads to an intense argument between the two. On the other side of the table, Furinji calmly explains to Izumi why Kenichi lives with them under the watchful eyes of Shigeru, who is hanging upside down and creeping Izumi out. She also explains that Kenichi is studying karate, kung fu, muay thai, and judo as a resident apprentice. Izumi admits she thought they were all the same thing, but Furinji comforts her by saying it is okay for girls not to know the difference. Their civil conversation quickly turns into a heated exchange of words, with Izumi accusing Furinji of being uncivilized and Furinji trying to defend herself. The argument gets very heated, and they turn to Kenichi, trying to get him to pick a side. Under immense pressure, Kenichi does what he knows best, attempt to run away, and on opening the door, he reveals the dojo masters eavesdropping, but they instantly disperse. Furinji gets fed up and attempts to take control of the situation, so she asks Kenichi to go back to training, and also tries to send Izumi away by asking her what she's still doing there if she truly dislikes martial arts. But to her disappointment, Izumi says that she is actually interested in martial arts and vows to come to the dojo every day to watch the training sessions. Furinji tells her not to waste her time coming as she might not last 2 seconds. Izumi sees this as a challenge and decides she would enroll in the trial course. Kenichi tells Izumi not to try that as the dojo is built differently. Furinji, on the other hand, sees an opportunity to be mischievous and slyly welcomes the idea. All the while, Nijima has a fiendish smile on his face as he watches his evil schemes successfully unfold. Nijima imagines a scenario where Kenichi jumps in to save Izumi during her fight with Furinji, which will make Furinji upset with Kenichi, giving him an opportunity to slither into Furinji's side. To kickstart the trial, Izumi is asked to choose one martial arts style to start with, but she is completely clueless about martial arts, so Furinji explains the styles to her, which does little to help Izumi. In the corner, Shigeru asks Nijima if he is interested in becoming a disciple, but he quickly declines, having his own ulterior motives in his mind. But this doesn't stop Shigeru from following him, as she wonders why a high school student is unskilled in the usage of sharp objects like the sickle. Kenichi brings the elder to save the situation, and when the elder shows up, he tells Izumi that because their dojo is a difficult one to get into, he would have her run a trial. For this test, Izumi is required to do 10 push-ups on one thumb. Izumi exclaims that it is humanly impossible to achieve that until she sees Furunji effortlessly doing it. When she admits she can't do it, the elder gives her an advantage by allowing her to do normal push-ups on both hands. Initially, Furunji protests this is unfair, but her grandfather pays her no heed. As Izumi sets out to do the push-ups, she can barely even lift her body, much to the surprise of everyone. They whisper that she must be too much of a nerd to be unable to perform such a simple exercise. Eventually, she breaks down in tears and gives up, and as Kenichi almost steps in to rescue her, the elder stops him. Meanwhile, Shiger keeps on chasing Nejima around the dojo, up until he unknowingly falls into a trap. Back in the dojo, Izumi watches as Kenichi continues his training with Sasaki, and she is joined by Furunji, who offers her tea. Furunji apologizes for the immaturity she had displayed earlier, and Izumi apologizes for getting carried away. She, however, explains that she thinks Kenichi is better suited for less hostile activities such as gardening, and Furunji supports her by saying that he is usually seen as someone who lacks talent for martial arts by other people. Furunji continues by saying that Kenichi only enrolled in martial arts because he got tired of running away from bullies. To confirm this, even though he is beaten to a pulp, he immediately gets up even when Sakai tells him to run away. Back in the forest, Nejima finds himself at the hot spring and wonders if something like that exists in the dojo. He is further surprised to see Shiger emerge almost naked from the water, sending him running again for his life. At the end of the day, Izumi apologizes to the masters for interrupting their training sessions with Kenichi, but the elder tells her it doesn't matter because he believes she learned a valuable lesson during the whole encounter. He also tells her that she should feel free to visit any time, but she will eventually take the trial test. As Izumi leaves, Kenichi heaves a sigh of relief, happy that everything went well in the end, and wonders if he really did not want Izumi to stay. Furunji teases him about how he seemed more energetic today. The masters realize that Kenichi actually never took the thumb push-up test, and they all wonder if he can actually pass it, although they believe it should not be a struggle for him. On their way back home, Nejima laments his failed plans as he violently scribbles a new one into his notebook. Izumi, on the other hand, is grateful for her experience in the dojo as she learned to stop running and stand up for herself. Nejima suggests his new plan to her, which involves her wearing a sexy attire to seduce Kenichi, but Izumi has something different in mind. She is determined to become someone worthy enough to Kenichi. Watch this video on the screen next. See you soon.